Chapter 86. Due to Jean Wan's threatening tone, the secretary paused for a moment. She then raised her head and said with disdain, "Che, aren't you just relying on the fact that your family has some stinky money? Do you think you're very capable just because you bought 2 companies?" Jean Wan smiled faintly. "You're not convinced?" "How would I dare to not be convinced? You're the G family's young lady. Hasn't the company been consolidated into some studio? I'm sure Miss G won't be able to tolerate us. Rather than waiting to be chased out by you, I'd rather leave myself." With that said, the clerk gave a look to the other colleagues, and the other clerks started to pack up without a word. Jean Wan glanced at the secretary who was the first to rebel. She nodded her head in approval. "And self-awareness isn't a bad skill. Before you leave, remember to turn off the lights in the office. The electricity here isn't for you to hide behind the computer and put on makeup." Xiao Ba had just returned with the personal files of the secretaries. Jean Wan received it and saw the photo on the file at the very top. It was the one who had taken the initiative to argue with her earlier. That secretary suddenly sarcastically said, "The G family's young lady is still short of such a few yuan in electricity bills? We're not very clear about your personal situation, but we heard that you married into the famous Mo family in Haicheng. Is the Mo family's CEO your husband? You've been married for quite a long time, but you haven't gotten pregnant yet. You'd better not be infertile. Otherwise you'll be kicked out sooner or later. The Mo family definitely won't want a chicken that can't lay eggs." The moment she finished speaking, the other secretaries all laughed mockingly. Jean Wan did not get angry and instead smiled. She casually tossed the personal file in her hands onto the table by the side. "This file is yours? 30 years old, unmarried, and staying in such a small company for an entire year without leaving. Are you delusional enough to climb up to the Han family? Not to mention that Han Tianyuan can no longer see the light of day, even the previous him had slept with so many women. With your looks, I'm afraid you won't even be able to climb onto a proper hotel bed." That secretary instantly glared at her. "What nonsense are you spouting? I'm only 23 years old. Oh, it seems like you purposely lied to others about your age. But according to your ID, you're indeed 30 years old." At the same time, Jean Wan glanced at her chest. "That's right, I was just about to ask, where did you get your chest done? To be able to grow from an airport to such a large size and yet only have a slight sagging, the plastic surgery hospital must be quite good." She pointed at the photo on the file in her hand. This photo should have been taken more than a year ago, and her upper body could be seen. "Is this how Miss G slander people? My breasts are real." The secretary was so angry that her eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. "Don't be so agitated. The prosthesis on the chin is almost crooked from anger. The double eyelids were done many years ago, right? Don't think that just because you are," the Li said, "ba and to say, "Gee, that you ba I. Don't think that just because you're in charge of this place you can say whatever you want." The secretary's lips turned green. "The photo from before is right here. I wonder if Han Tianyuan would have given you the opportunity to be a secretary if he had carefully looked through your file." Jean Wan casually placed the other people's files to the side. That secretary immediately rushed forward and picked up her own file. She quickly stuffed it into her bag and turned to leave. However, when she saw that it was raining heavily outside, she turned back to glare at Jean Wan. She took out her phone and made a call. After the call connected, she said sweetly, "Dear, I'm off work. The rain outside is too heavy. Can you drive over to pick me up?" After that, she hung up. She turned back and rolled her eyes at Jean Wan in disdain. She said with some pride, "There are plenty of men chasing after me. Xiao Han is just one of them. As long as I beckon with my finger, all the rich men will line up to the end of my office. As for this broken place of yours, this great aunt doesn't want to stay anymore." Finishing her words, she twisted her waist and entered the elevator. Jean Wan looked at that figure and instinctively tugged at the corner of her lips. She had no intention of quarreling with others. However, the vases and trash that Han Tianyuan had brought in earlier, she could not possibly be so bored as to raise them. Jean Wan turned around and returned to her own office. 10 minutes later, Jean Wan left the studio and went downstairs. She saw that the secretary from earlier was standing in front of the revolving door on the first floor. Beside her were 2 other secretaries from the same office. A luxurious car worth 1,000,000 yuan stopped in front of the door. That secretary immediately raised her brows in pride. She turned back and saw that Jean Wan had also come down. She immediately revealed an even prouder smile at her. Under the envious gazes of the 2 colleagues by her side, She raised the bag in her hand to cover her head and ran down the stairs. When she reached the car door, she opened it and bent down to say to the person inside, "Dear, my colleagues aren't being picked up. Can you send them home on the way?" After that secretary turned back and called for the two female colleagues to enter the car. She then rolled her eyes at Jinwan in disdain and sat in the car while twisting her waist. She then closed the door in a confident manner. In the car, the two female colleagues could not stop exclaiming and praising, "This is really too rich, isn't it? It's the latest model of Porsche, ah. I also wish to have such a rich boyfriend. I'm really too envious. Wow, there's even a bouquet of blue roses in the car. Ah dear, your boyfriend is really too romantic." That secretary smiled delightedly. She turned and kissed the man in the car. At the same time, she used a disdainful gaze to glance at Jinwan, who was still standing alone in front of the building. The envious voices in the car continued. In the rainy night, the sound of an engine suddenly came from outside. The black and noble car easily overtook this car in the midst of the crowded cars and neatly stopped in front of the building. Holy shit. One of the female colleagues looked out with sharp eyes. Rolls-Royce Commemorative Limited Edition Ghost. Ah? Is this the legendary Ghost worth over 60 million yuan? Heavens, this car is too cool, isn't it? It's really so cool. Ah, this car is too cool. The design of the car body is really nice. It's really the most eye-catching one out of all the luxury cars here. If I can sit in this kind of car, I wouldn't have lived my life in vain. Who is this car here to pick up? I heard that this seems to be the car of MO Corporation CEO? The car instantly fell into a deathly silence. MO Corporation CEO? MO Jingshan. Chapter 87. The women in the car each had their own thoughts, but their eyes were filled with excitement as they stared at the man who stepped out of the Ghost. The man was dressed in a cold-colored suit. His figure was slender and well-proportioned, and his casual posture and steps appeared very upright. After he stepped out of the car, he held a black umbrella in one hand and removed his similarly cold-colored long jacket with the other. He approached Jinwan and held the umbrella firmly over her head. There was no hypocritical romance like casually gifting her a bouquet of blue roses. Instead, the lofty man personally stepped out of the car, stepped across the rain-soaked asphalt, and held the umbrella over Jinwan's head. The moment he approached, he directly draped the jacket over Jinwan's back. At the same time, his long arms reached out to pull her into his embrace to prevent her from being drenched by the wind and rain outside the umbrella. The legendary MO Jingshan was said to be extremely cold and difficult to approach. However, in front of Jinwan he did not put on any airs at all. His meticulous care surpassed everything else. MO Jingshan lowered his head to see that Jinwan's complexion was slightly pale from the wind. He held her as they walked toward the car. "I asked you to wait obediently, not to run out and wait in the wind. I calculated the time and felt that you would arrive soon. I was afraid that your appearance in my small studio would cause too much of a commotion, so I came down first." Jinwan touched the jacket that was just draped over her body. "I have a jacket on me. Quickly put it on." MO Jingshan pressed down on her hand that was about to take off the jacket and directly brought her to the car. He opened the door for her to enter first. The wind and rain outside were very heavy. Jinwan was brought all the way to the car, but she was not drenched by the rain at all. She did not even feel the slightest bit wet. After MO Jingshan entered the car, he prompted her to fasten her seatbelt. Outside the car, the sound of the rain was soft, and the man's voice was especially seductive. "Why are you so gloomy? In a bad mood?" Jinwan tugged on her seatbelt and casually answered, "No, it's just that I just merged the studio. There are many people and things that need to be sorted out. I'm a little tired." MO Jingshan glanced at her listless expression and lightly snorted. "Treating your husband as a decoration? From the very beginning, I never intended for you to interfere in the purchase of these two small companies. Mrs. MO, do you really want to achieve something yourself? If I can't make myself better and more qualified to stand by your side, there will only be more and more people gossiping behind my back. They can't wait for me to sink into the dust and widen the gap between us," Jinwan said half-jokingly. MO Jingshan's lips curved. "Dust? Even if someone presses you into the ground, I can still pull you out." "That's not necessarily true. When I'm by your side, others probably don't even dare to touch a strand of my hair. But what if one day you're not by my side?" Jinwan had only casually said this because of her previous life's experience. MO Jingshan suddenly turned around, glancing at her. MO Jingshan's sudden glance confused her. She thought he was dissatisfied with her words, so she didn't continue to talk nonsense. Indeed, Everything from her previous life was in the past. The current her was definitely in control of the direction of her life. The gains and losses and fears of the past should not continue to affect her. She thought Mo Jingshan was slightly displeased, but why was it that after only a moment of silence the man suddenly leaned over? Jinwan raised her eyes to meet his black eyes due to his familiar scent. She was stunned for a moment. "Why are you?" She was astonished, and the sound she made was completely swallowed by him. The rain outside was heavy. There were cars speeding by in front, and the street lights on the left illuminated the area. Even though the car windows were completely shut, from the angle of the front window, they could more or less see the situation inside the car. Jinwan frantically raised her hand to push him away, but the man did not stand on ceremony. He abruptly bit down on her lips, forcing her teeth apart. Slowly he kissed her inch by inch. Warm and strong hands moved down from her shoulders, pulling her into his embrace through the seatbelt. Jinwan was slightly dizzy from the kiss. She panted and tried to avoid it, but the man's kisses landed on the side of her neck and ears. He kissed her earlobe, moved around and sucked on her collarbone. He moved down, biting the edge of her collar as he tugged it down. Jinwan's hair that was scattered behind her was slightly messy as it circled around her fair neck. "This is, in the car." Jinwan struggled to find her voice, but it was only a soft moan. Mo Jingshan's kiss continued, not giving her the slightest chance to retreat. He entangled the kiss and slowly moved down the side of her neck. Jinwan was kissed so hard that she couldn't control herself. She whispered a reminder in his ear. Her voice was unbelievably soft. She hooked her arms around his neck and gripped the collar of his shirt tightly, as though she was afraid that she would slip from the seat. Her body seemed to be on fire. Her hand moved down, and her eyes were misty as she pressed her fingers against his shoulder. "Even the passing cars can see it?" Mo Jingshan paused and did not continue. After 2 seconds of silence, he lowered his voice against her neck. "And I won't bully you here." His voice was very low and hoarse. Was this not considered bullying? It was as though the car was about to shake right here. Everything was fine and he suddenly kissed her. He clearly knew that she could not resist his kiss and was almost subdued by him here. Jinwan glanced sideways, secretly glaring at the man who had returned to control the steering wheel. In the Porsche opposite, although they could not see clearly, they could vaguely see Jinwan being pressed against the car and kissed for a long time by Mo Jingshan. All of them swallowed their saliva in envy. For a man like Mo Jingshan, not to mention his illustrious family background or his outer appearance, he was definitely the best in the world. Furthermore, his figure was also extremely good. It was likely that in bed he would definitely be the type that would make women wish they were dead. She then looked at the skinny fake nouveau riche in the car. In an instant she felt that there was no way to compare them. It was as though they were billions of light years apart, like the difference between clouds and mud. The two female colleagues only quietly glanced at each other, not daring to show all of their disdain on their faces. However, the clerk sitting in the front row already had a sour expression on her face. She stared at the black and noble limited edition Ghost as it steadily drove away from the building with a sweet-sounding engine sound. After returning home, Mo Jingshan did not speak. Jinwan thought that after driving for so long, he should have already calmed down. Perhaps tonight she could check the office's email before sleeping. In the end, the moment she entered the password and the door opened, before Jinwan could even change her shoes, she was suddenly pulled in by the man. She could not even make a sound before she was kissed. Following that, her nose, cheeks, ears, chin and finally her lips. Jinwan wanted to ask why he was suddenly so passionate tonight. There were clearly no signs of ambiguity earlier. Chapter 88. Jinwan did not have the time to think. All of her consciousness was carried by the man, and the moment she fell onto the sofa, it disappeared into nothingness. Mo Jingshan knelt by her side, trapping her beneath him. His kisses moved down her neck bit by bit. Jinwan placed her hand on his shoulder, softly saying, "Wait a minute." The man's movements did not stop. His low and hoarse voice whispered by her ear, "N?" She pushed against his shoulder even more forcefully, raising her voice slightly. "I thought of a few problems that I discovered in the studio earlier. I need you to help me analyze them. After all, this is my first time managing. I'm not as skilled and decisive as you. I don't need you to interfere in other aspects, but I still need you to help me with some decisions." He paused, lowering his eyes to look at her. "Must you say it now?" "It's not that it has to be now, but I made a bet with my father. It's already been half a month and there's still no progress in the studio. I'm afraid that if it continues to be delayed." Mo Jingshan's elegant and deep brows rose slightly. With me around, what are you afraid of? I just want you to find some time to be my strategist. It's not like I want you to waste so much effort to interfere with my studio. He chuckled softly. Your studio has my name, but you don't plan on letting me interfere. Am I just wasting my time? My studio is just a small studio. You're usually very busy. I don't want to waste too much of your time and energy. Time and energy can be accommodated, but it also depends on who it's being used against. Mo Jingshin sighed, smiling as he leaned down once more. Every time you're always thinking of ways to find a topic to talk about. Can't you take the initiative tonight? Don't change the topic. You're clearly the one who interrupted my main topic. The man kissed her cheeks from time to time and said casually, if you have any questions, sort them out and send them to me tomorrow. If you really can't cope with the management who just took over, I can transfer the elites of MO Corporation's personnel department to help you. Of course, if you need, I can go there myself. That's not necessary. It's not that I can't cope with it. Although I'm very confident about the future development of the studio and the profits it can make, after all, I haven't learned much about financial management. I feel that sometimes I'm a little stubborn. If I'm too stubborn, it may have the opposite effect. But if I don't establish my authority, I can't control those people. If the studio wants to develop steadily in the long run, interpersonal relationships and management are also very important. If she allowed Mo Jingshin, this god, to enter her small studio, those people would most likely explode. And you're right. Mo Jingshin sat down by her side. Jinwan thought he wasn't going to continue, but he put her on his lap. He kissed her face again, which made her heart itch, but she couldn't resist it at all. Her whole body was hooked, and she leaned softly in his arms without the strength to move. Then, do you think I should find some time to learn about business management? Previously, in order to allow me to work at G Corporation, my dad had signed me up for some related courses, but I never went, Jinwan said softly as she leaned against his chest. The man's low chuckle seemed to come from his chest. She could clearly feel it in his embrace. She was about to ask him why he was laughing when her ear was bitten by him. She hissed in pain and raised her hand to cover her ear. She turned to see Mo Jingshin's eyes were as dark as the deep sea as he softly said, "Your husband is already impatient. Do you really have to talk nonsense with me here and now?" Jinwan did not immediately retort and only glared at him. Ever since Grandfather Mo's birthday, he had indeed restrained himself for a few days. 2 days ago he was busy at the company, and she slept early. Mo Jingshin pulled her hand over, pressing it against a certain part of his body. Jinwan subconsciously tried to pull her hand back, but he held it firmly and she could not do so. Her entire face instantly flushed red. Mo Jingshin. You want to sleep early? He pressed against her ear, the warmth of his breath teasing her ear. Tonight you take the initiative. I'll let you off after just one time. If I were to continue like this, Jinwan's breathing became heavier. She did not dare to move her hand, but for some reason she asked, will it really end after just one time? The man did not speak, but he had already kissed her cheek, tickling and teasing her. What counts as taking the initiative? She did not attempt to move her hand away. Jinwan thought that she had secretly watched many films when she was in school. Furthermore, 10 years later the internet was too advanced. Many things could be found on software or on various small foreign websites. But facing Mo Jingshin, she was really at a loss. She did not know if she should learn from those films. After all, those kinds of things were a little too lewd. Besides, the men in those films were worlds apart from Mo Jingshin. Faced with him, Jinwan really didn't know how to deal with him. Mo Jingshin didn't know what to do. Mo Jingshin did not speak, only watching her with an unfathomable gaze. Finally, Jinwan raised her arms and wrapped them around his neck, instinctively kissing his chin. The man's hoarse voice finally came down to press against her lips. In the U Garden, you secretly moved all my things back to the master bedroom. I thought you were going to use all your tricks to seduce your husband back to sleep with you. In the end, I was thinking too much. His teasing voice sounded by her ear. Jinwan's face instantly became as though it had been burned, turning even redder. Back then she suddenly felt as though she had been reborn. She wanted nothing more than to stick her entire body to him. She wanted nothing more than for Mo Jingshin to immediately see her sincerity in wanting to be with him. Although she had indeed thought about taking the initiative to seduce him, she had never put it into practice. After all, every time she would be led by him to the point where she could not control herself. How could she think about taking the initiative? You're really thinking too much. Jinwan bit down harshly on his chin. The man did not seem to feel much pain but still gave a low moan. This moan made Jinwan's head feel as though it was about to explode. His strong hands had already reached her waist, pressing her into his embrace. It was as though he was threatening to make her feel the unconcealable changes in that part of his body. Jinwan could not avoid him and simply wrapped her arms around him. She buried her face in his neck and began to imitate the way she had seen in the past. She tentatively stuck out her tongue and kissed the man's Adam's apple. The night she was drugged, she seemed to have done this as well. However, at that time her mind was already muddled. Later on, she was pressed down by him on the bed and did not have the strength to move. Chapter 89. Jinwan was kissed until she was almost out of breath. She was finally released and took a few breaths of air, lying motionlessly on his shoulder. "You're not going to continue?" Mo Jingshan was given the cold shoulder by her. He lowered his eyes to look at the lazy little woman who did not want to move. Jinwan raised her eyes, her expression sincere as she negotiated. Then it settled. "Just once." The man lowered his head to look at her. "It depends on your performance." She decided to continue nibbling on his chin. She raised her hands, nibbling and kissing while unbuttoning his shirt. When her hands touched a fiery, perfect chest, she could not help but softly sigh at the wonderful feeling. She raised her face to kiss his lips. There was no need for Jinwan to tease him for long. Her shaky and hard actions caused Mo Jingshan to reach the end of his patience. He carried her up, walked around the sofa, kicked open the bedroom door and brought her into the bed. Jinwan's clothes had long been removed. Her skirt was lifted. She only whimpered once before the man's hand reached in. She bit her lips, unwilling to make a sound. He nibbled on her earlobe, his hot breath lightly blowing on her ear. He kissed it back and forth. Her ear turned from white to pink and from pink to red. Broken moans slowly escaped from her mouth. Jinwan buried her face in his shoulder, feeling the movements of his hand. She could only tightly hold on to his half-open shirt, allowing the bone-chilling stimulation to attack her. All of a sudden, a wave of white light rushed toward her. She faltered, her body trembling uncontrollably. The sound that had reached her lips was stopped by his kiss. While she was still trembling, he had already pressed against her. Jinwan could not help but bite his ear as well. Her voice was soft and hoarse. "Annoying." Mo Jingshan sucked in a heavy breath. "It was not a bad idea to die on top of her. Let's see if you still bite me in the future. I'll bite you to death." Jinwan said harshly by his ear. She even used her teeth to harshly bite his ear twice. Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. He did not reply but softly said by her ear, "Go ahead." Jinwan's gaze faltered. Her face was still warm, but her legs had already been easily separated. The man had already charged in. It was too heavy, too deep. Jinwan did not recover for a long while until she heard him whisper for her to relax. She whimpered and glared at him secretly. Her body trembled. She hadn't gotten used to it yet, so how could she relax? Who was the one who said it would be over after one try? It was only 9 o'clock when he got home. It was almost midnight when he finally finished. No matter how Jinwan scratched and bit him, he did not relent. After that, he took Jinwan to take a shower. She wrapped herself in the quilt and was about to fall asleep. The phone on the bedside table suddenly vibrated. Jinwan opened her eyes and glanced at it. It was Mo Jingshan's private phone. Why would there be a call at this time? Is there something urgent in the company? Mo Jingshan was still in the bathroom. Jinwan hugged the blanket and sat up. She picked up her phone and saw that it was an unknown number. She picked it up. Jingshan probably won't answer the phone for a while. Call back later. Jinwan picked up the phone and didn't wait for the other party to speak, directly explaining the situation. The person on the other end of the phone was silent for a moment. Then, Secretary Anne's gentle and probing voice sounded, "Mrs. Mo? Is she in?" Jinwan's drowsiness instantly dissipated. She glanced at the caller ID and memorized it. She placed the phone back by her ear. "Secretary Anne? Calling your COMO so late at night, is there something urgent?" "My apologies, Mrs. Mo. I've disturbed your rest. I know that COMO has a video conference with the American side at 1 o'clock tonight, so he shouldn't be resting at this time. That's why I called." Secretary Anne politely and gently said, "His other phone should be out of battery. That's why I called him." Jinwan did not speak. Calling someone else's husband in the middle of the night. Furthermore, her motive for returning to the country was so obvious. It was impossible for her to have no motive at all. "I wanted to talk to COMO about tonight's video conference. After all, it's a collaboration with America's Shine Group." Secretary Anne's voice paused for a moment before softly saying, "Also, I wanted to ask COMO, Did I leave my lipstick in his car? Jinwan calmly glanced at the time. Oh, lipstick is it? When I came back with him last night, I really didn't find anything of yours in his car. Then perhaps it fell outside, Secretarian softly said. When I got off work tonight, I had just left the company when my car suddenly broke down by the roadside. The rain was too heavy and coincidentally CEO Mo's car passed by. I asked him to give me a ride. Before I left the car, I used the lipstick to touch up my makeup. When I returned, I realized that the lipstick wasn't in my bag. I thought I left it in CEO Mo's car. Jinwan held the phone and slowly smiled. There really isn't anything of yours in his car. Think carefully again. Did you leave it somewhere else? It's only a lipstick. Which brand is it? If Secretarian likes it, I can help you buy another one tomorrow. There's no need for that. I'm really sorry for disturbing Mrs. Mo by calling so late at night. It's fine. Today's rain was really heavy. Should be getting colder soon. Secretarian, remember to wear more clothes and bring an umbrella to work tomorrow. All right. Thank you, Mrs. Mo. You're welcome. Jinwan indifferently glanced in the direction of the bedroom door. She heard the sound of the bathroom door being opened. She softly said, Jingshen has already showered. Don't you have a video conference to discuss with him? Do you need me to pass the phone to him? Then I'll have to trouble Mrs. Mo. Secretary Anne's voice still carried a hint of a smile. Jinwan got off the bed and walked out of the bedroom. She saw that Mo Jingshen was really planning to go to the study. Hubby, Secretary Anne's call. Jinwan's voice was gentle as she walked over. When he turned back to look at her, she directly handed the phone to him. Mo Jingshen had just showered. His eyes were still filled with satisfaction. After showering, his expression was refreshed. His refreshing scent was mixed with a hint of late-night laziness. Jinwan did not look at him. She handed the phone over and turned to return to the bedroom. In the end, she had only taken 2 steps to the side when her waist suddenly tightened. The man's arm directly reached over to carry her back. Jinwan turned back to glare at him unhappily. Mo Jingshen did not let go of her, using his other hand to answer the phone. Chapter 90. What's the matter? Mo Jingshen's hand gently caressed her waist through her thin nightgown. Jinwan pursed her lips. She was silent for a moment before glancing at him. Just now on the phone, Secretarian said that she left her lipstick in your car. Mo Jingshen's handsome brows rose slightly. Lipstick? Jinwan unhappily glanced at him before lowering her eyes and gently pushing away his hand around her waist. Let go of me first. Don't we have a project to discuss with America later? I'm going to sleep first. We'll talk tomorrow. The man's hand did not move at all from her waist. When she pushed him away, he pulled her even tighter into his embrace. It's still early. His voice was close by her ears. His words were so calm that it caused the little flames in Jinwan's heart to burn wildly. But I'm sleepy. Jinwan unhappily struggled in his embrace. Continue the call with your secretary. After you're done, wake me up in the bedroom. What did she say? Mo Jingshen did not let go. Due to her struggle, his voice was slightly heavy. Jinwan could not move and decided to stop struggling. She allowed herself to be trapped in his embrace. With her back facing his embrace, her emotions were hard to decipher. She said that when she got off work her car broke down, so you gave her a ride. Mo Jingshen looked at her and sighed with a smile. He comfortingly patted her waist. Today the company is working overtime on Shine's project. Secretary Anne used to work at Shine, so she left the company at almost the same time after sorting out the project proposal. Jinwan still did not speak, only listening. When I drove out of the company, I saw Secretary Anne's car parked by the roadside. The car door was open and half of her body was soaked in the rain. Regardless of whether it was because of her superior relationship or her relationship with the Anne family, it was impossible for her to ignore this scene. So you let her get in the car? Jinwan glanced at him, the flames in her heart burning even brighter. Seeing that she was unhappy, Mo Jingshen's deep brows locked onto her, his hand caressing her head. I plan on sending the company's car to send her back. Secretary Anne said that the project documents needed for tonight's meeting are still in her bag. It should have been soaked and she needs to rush home to prepare a new set. She directly asked if I could send her back. The corners of Jinwan's eyes rose. She felt that this was too much of a coincidence. Her address wasn't far from the Jean Lin building where you were at the time. Mo Jingshen's voice was steady and calm. His explanation was also sincere. I asked her to sit in the back row and didn't touch Mrs. Mo's exclusive seat. Don't be angry, Anne. Jinwan glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Then did you kiss her? The corners of Mo Jingshan's lips curved up. He smiled ambiguously. What do you think? Secretary N specifically told me just now that when she got out of the car, she touched up her makeup at the last minute and even reapplied her lipstick. Why is she wearing lipstick? Why did you tell me so deliberately? Jinwan looked at Mo Jingshan without blinking. Mo Jingshan did not speak but silently watched her. After a moment he softly asked, You don't believe me? I believe you. The corners of Jinwan's lips curved into a deep smile, but she was secretly gritting her teeth in displeasure. But your secretary N chose such a time to call me. It's clear that she's using her little tricks to declare war on me. Could it be that I should calmly pretend that nothing has happened? How could she not believe Mo Jingshan? Furthermore, after being kissed by him for so long, there was not the slightest hint of another woman. Whether her man was clean or not, how he behaved she was naturally clear. But what exactly was it that made Secretary N, who had been slowly advancing step by step, to suddenly make such an extreme move? Did she no longer plan to continue playing her role as the CEO's secretary? Mo Jingshan's gaze indifferently swept toward the phone on the sofa. His gaze was cold and calm. He did not say a word, and it was impossible to tell if he was happy or angry. Just as Jinwan did not plan on dwelling on this problem at such a late hour, the man's voice suddenly came from above her head. What kind of car do you like? Ah. Jinwan was startled. She was still in his embrace, but her brain could not keep up with this rhythm. What car? In the future, leave that ghost in the company for public use. Let's change to another one. Mo Jingshan's gaze was clear and deep. He watched Jinwan's slightly confused expression. Change car? Jinwan almost choked on her own saliva. Although she was slightly disgusted by the fact that N Shuyan had sat in his car today, she was not that crazy. Furthermore, that N Shuyan sat in the back row. Usually, Shinmu or others would occasionally sit in the back row. This did not make her feel disrespected or anything. Mo Jingshan's thoughtfulness in this aspect was not something many men could achieve. Thus, Jinwan did not feel the need to change cars. Furthermore, this was a car that was worth more than 60 million yuan. And it was a Rolls-Royce commemorative limited edition Ghost. The current price was like this. 10 years later it would only be more expensive. To collectors and luxury car enthusiasts, the price might even exceed hundreds of millions. Even when she was born in the G family, she had never squandered tens of millions without batting an eyelid. There's no need to change cars. I quite like this Ghost. I'm not that unreasonable. Jinwan pursed her lips. The man chuckled lowly by her ear. You like the Ghost? The other models of this car are also not bad. There's really no need to change. You're throwing a car worth more than 60 million yuan in the company for public use. You might as well use money to kill me. Jinwan raised her hand and patted his chest. However, she did not hit it hard. It was more like a tickle. She glared at him, threatening, You're not allowed to change. Aren't you unhappy? Mo Jingshan's voice was very low by her side. His voice was still magnetic and pleasant to the ears. Jinwan could hear the indulgence and compromise in his tone. She could tell that he really did not intend for her to suffer such grievances. Even if it was a small grievance that others purposely created out of nothing. If you dare to change the car, I'll be even more unhappy. Jinwan turned and bit down on his chin. In any case, it was almost time for his meeting in America. No matter how she bid him, he could not throw her back onto the bed in the bedroom. The man's gaze immediately darkened. He lowered his head and kissed her lips. Then how can I be happy? Jinwan leaned into his embrace. She narrowed her eyes and smiled. Don't touch me for half a month. Let me rest for a while. How about that? The man did not speak. Jinwan thought that since he was willing to change a car worth 60 million yuan, he would be able to compromise over such a small matter. In the end, Mo Jingshan threw her a meaningful glance. He calmly said, No. Jinwan, 60 million yuan, and you're going to throw it into the company without batting an eye. You actually won't agree to such a small request of mine? Mo Jingshan released her and turned toward the study. Without turning back, he said, Don't even think about it. Chapter 91. The next morning, Jinwan did not drive herself. Instead, she sat in Mo Jingshan's car to the studio. When she entered the car, she casually scanned the interior of the car. In the end, she finally found a golden square tube of lipstick in an inconspicuous gap in the back seat. Jinwan reached out to retrieve the lipstick. She opened it to take a look and raised her brows in a light smile. When Mo Jingshan saw the lipstick, he calmly glanced at it. His tone was the same as last night. Are you sure you don't want to change the car? I'm not changing. Jean Wan curved her lips, playing with the lipstick in her hand. Anyway, what I mind is not the car, and her motive is not this lipstick. Mo Jingshan's thin lips curved slightly. This little woman said that she believed him and seemed to have thought it through, but her words still carried a hint of jealousy. In the afternoon, Secretary An drove out of the company. She suddenly saw Jean Wan walking past the plaza in front of the company with a small gift bag in her hand. Mrs. Mo? Secretary An stopped the car by her side. She politely nodded and smiled at her. Jean Wan turned back to look at her before glancing at her car. Secretary An's car was repaired very quickly. It broke down last night and you can already drive it out normally today? Secretary An smiled lightly. Last night I called the car dealer over. Their efficiency is indeed very fast. When I came to work today I saw that the car had already been repaired and sent back. Not bad. Last night it rained so heavily. Furthermore, it was outside of working hours, yet their efficiency is still so fast. It seems like I can visit this car dealer often in the future. Jean Wan handed over the exquisite gift bag in her hand as she spoke. Secretary An was startled. This is? Last night your lipstick was indeed left in Jingshan's car. I only saw it this morning. Jean Wan smiled indifferently. It's a pity that I only found out when I sent you to the car wash. When the workers were cleaning the car, they accidentally wet your lipstick. I felt it was a pity to see that. Coincidentally, I don't have anything on today. Before I came, I bought a new lipstick of the same design. Here, take it. Mrs. Mo, there's really no need. It's just a lipstick. You don't have to buy me a new one. Besides, I accidentally left it in CEO Mo's car. The smile on Secretary An's face was polite and distant. She pushed open the car door and alighted. She was very considerate and polite as she stood beside Jean Wan to talk. Jean Wan noticed this detail and realized that Secretary An really knew how to conduct herself well. She curved her lips slightly and calmly said, "It was already late last night, yet you still specifically mentioned the lipstick over the phone. I thought this lipstick was very important to you. I've already bought it. In any case, this color doesn't suit me. Secretary An, you should just accept it." As she spoke, she threw a small gift bag containing a lipstick into the car seat through the window. Secretary An could not refuse and could only smile at Jean Wan. "How about this? I'll be heading to the business hall to retrieve some things in the afternoon. I wonder if there are any good coffee shops along the way. Mrs. Mo, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? I'll treat you as a form of thanks for buying the new lipstick for me. This time you've really asked the right person. I do know a few good coffee shops." Jean Wan was all smiles and did not reject anyone. Secretary An nodded and walked around the car with a smile. As she opened the car door, she said, "Then get in the car. Let's go have a cup of coffee together." It's hard to refuse such hospitality. I won't stand on ceremony then. Jean Wan smiled and entered her car. In the car, the two women casually chatted about random things along the way. However, it was as though they were purposely avoiding the topic of Mo Jingshan. They only talked about America's Shine Group and the various news in the country. They chatted and laughed as though they were having a good time. When they reached a street near the business hall, the two entered an elegant and clean coffee shop. Jean Wan casually ordered a cup of mocha. Secretary An also ordered the same. Secretary An also likes to drink mocha? It's all right. I grew up in America, so I don't really drink all kinds of bitter coffee. However, mocha is indeed one of my favorites. Although Secretary An's lipstick is different from mine, the brand is the same. You also like to drink the same coffee, so our preferences are similar? Jean Wan smiled as though it was unintentional. I just don't know if it's the same when it comes to liking men. Hearing these words, Secretary An was quiet for a moment. She then smiled. "Mrs. Mo, you specially came to find me today to have a chat with me, right?" Jean Wan raised her brows. "Then tell me, what do I want to talk to you about?" "Of course, it's to talk about COMO." Secretary An calmly and fearlessly looked into Jean Wan's eyes. "Mrs. Mo is a smart person. It's easy to talk to smart people. I don't need to play the role of an innocent person. To be able to come here from America, my goal is very simple and straightforward. It's just like the reason why Mrs. Mo came to find me today. It's as simple and straightforward." "So, Secretary An's lipstick is really just a cover? It's to lure me out and take the initiative to find you?" Jean Wan instantly smiled. Secretary An's lips curved imperceptibly. "Uncle Mo doesn't think highly of the marriage between you and COMO. Grandfather Mo is indeed muddle-headed. The so-called family's interests also have to be considered from a long-term perspective. Although the Ji family was once prosperous in Haicheng, the G Corporation standards in all aspects are constantly declining. This marriage does not have the slightest bit of benefits for the Mo family. It can barely be considered a match between the two families, but it's just barely. Speaking up to this point, Secretary indirectly looked into Jean Wan's calm eyes. Forgive me for being blunt. Mrs. Mo, your actions before and after marriage cannot be considered a good wife. Furthermore, I heard that a few months ago, your relationship with CEO Mo was not very harmonious. You really wanted a divorce. Jean Wan chuckled lightly. As expected, Secretary An's call last night was to find an opportunity for this conversation. Since Secretary An has spoken so clearly, then I won't hide it from you. Jean Wan supported her chin with one hand, blinking her eyes as she smiled at her. At the start, I was indeed not very used to life as a newlywed. I'm sure you also know how Jing Shen is a person who is cold on the outside but warm on the inside. At that time, I didn't really understand him, so I always wanted to return to being single and regain my freedom. Secretary An looked at Jean Wan, her eyes probing and sizing her up. Chapter 92. After Jean Wan finished speaking, Secretary An, who had just received the coffee, could not help but tighten her grip on the stirring spoon placed on the cup's rim. I'm actually not very familiar with the matters between you and CEO Mo. Most of it was hearsay. Secretary An maintained a smile, but it was somewhat stiff. It seems like the relationship between you and CEO Mo is really good. It's all right. Jean Wan shyly supported her chin with one hand. She blinked her eyes and smiled at her. Yesterday when you called, he had just gone to shower. If you had called a few minutes earlier, I don't think we would have been able to pick up the call. Jean Wan meaningfully blushed as she said, also that day I was in Jing Shen's office. Originally we were being intimate, but suddenly Grandfather Mo came. I shyly hid under his desk. You also know that I was actually in his office that day, but you don't know where exactly I hid, right? Secretary An did not speak. Her hand tightly gripped the stirring spoon in her cup. If Grandfather Mo did not suddenly come, Jing Shen might have directly carried me into the resting room next to his office. He is usually cold and hard to get close to, but when it comes to the matters between husband and wife, he is always so passionate that I can't handle it. Secretary An's expression could no longer be described as simply stiff. Only the corners of her lips were still forcefully curved up. This meant that she was actually still smiling, but her smile was not that natural. I'm sorry. What was I saying to you just now? Secretary An, you're not married yet. This kind of intimate topic between husband and wife is really not suitable for you. However, a man's stamina is too good, it's really troublesome. Usually, he doesn't even let me have a good night's sleep. Jean Wan blinked at him, her smile full of sweetness and affection. Although Jean Wan was doing it intentionally, every word she said was the truth. Every action, every tone, and every expression could not be faked. This kind of shyness and contentment was also not faked. Happiness and shyness, both real and dazzling. Secretary An slowly took a sip of coffee and then raised her eyes to smile at her. It was clear that she had regained some of her composure. I really didn't think that you would be so blissful. After all, CEO Mo once. Jean Wan smiled. He once what? My apologies. Secretary An subconsciously put her hand to her mouth, as if she had said something she should not have. This is, after all, CEO Mo's personal matter. It's not good for me to say too much. It looks like Mrs. Mo doesn't know much about his past, so all the more I can't speak carelessly. Jean Wan nodded in understanding. We're all women and we all have all kinds of curiosity that we shouldn't have. Your words have indeed piqued my curiosity. Just as Secretary An was about to speak, Jean Wan smiled mildly and interrupted her. But our relationship began from our marriage and we are loyal to our marriage. As long as my man has not cheated, nor is he too close to any other woman, and only loves me, regardless of whether he had a childhood sweetheart past, or if he had an unforgettable past, that is all in the past. After all, he is my man now. We are not children. Who hasn't had a past? Don't you think so? Secretary An watched Jean Wan for a moment. After a moment, the corners of her lips twitched. After a long while, she forced out a smile. You think so? What else? Earlier on, Secretary An casually mentioned the word, past. Could it be that you're not referring to what I'm thinking? Jean Wan's smile was light and carefree. My own husband. Exactly how good he is and exactly how many women adore him. I understand this very well and have long been mentally prepared. But from the moment we got married, he is my Jean Wan's husband. Even if he had thousands of women by his side in the past, they were all complete failures. And Shu Yan was silent for a moment. She stared at Jean Wan's expression, as though trying to see if her heart was as indifferent as she said. Jean Wan's fingers gently tapped on the table. From start to finish, she did not take a sip of her coffee. Her tone was light and unhurried. An outstanding person will naturally have no lack of pursuers. Regardless of who it was in the past or who it is in the future, they are all just lowly losers. Secretary Anne's gaze faltered. She did not speak. She raised the coffee cup to her lips and paused for a moment. However, she did not take another sip and place the cup down. She did not look at Jean Wan again. So, Secretary Anne, regardless of whether it is her family background or her intellect, they are all so high class. You most likely would not do such a lowly thing. Even if a very persuasive elder wants to support you, Secretary Anne, based on your own values and bottom line, you would not allow yourself to be branded with the title of a mistress. Am I right, Secretary Anne? After saying all this, Jean Wan took a sip of coffee. Her actions were calm. Even though her entire body was filled with aggression, her smile was languid, causing one to not feel the slightest bit of aggression. She was so elegant that it was as though she was watching from the sidelines, coldly watching a fish struggling in the mud. It's about time to go to the business hall. Let's drink coffee another day. Secretary Anne suddenly stood up and placed the 2 pink bills on the table. She picked up her bag and politely nodded at Jean Wan before turning to leave. All right, let's meet another day. Jean Wan raised her hand toward her. Like a lazy kitten waving its paw, she shook it at her. Before Secretary Anne could walk far, Jean Wan coincidentally picked up Mo Jingshan's call. She sweetly said, "Hello, hubby? And I just met Secretary Anne at the entrance of your company. She invited me to a coffee." Secretary Anne's footsteps gradually quickened until she was out of the coffee shop. Your tone is like a cat that has stolen a fish. What did you talk about? Mo Jingshan could easily hear Jean Wan's emotions from her voice. From the corner of her eyes, Jean Wan glanced at Secretary Anne outside the window. As expected, before Secretary Anne entered the car, she turned back to look. Seeing that Jean Wan was still on the phone, she expressionlessly opened the car door and entered the car. Only after Secretary Anne's car had left did Jean Wan lightly curve her lips. What else can women talk about? Especially a woman with a strong motive toward my hubby. And? So earlier, I might have been a little too fierce and scared that outstanding Secretary Anne away. Jean Wan held the phone as she spoke nonsensically. At the same time, she touched the already cold coffee cup by her hand. The man's low chuckle came from the other side of the phone. What? Your ability to bite people can be used on others? Chapter 93. Perfect. Mo Jingshan's voice was low and seductive. Who's more perfect than my Mrs. Mo? Don't try to coax me with such sweet words. Secretary Anne said today that the number of women you've had in the past could line up several times around the world. In the next moment, she could hear his low and husky laughter through the phone. Mrs. Mo's ability to rebuke people has improved by several times. Did you train your mouth overnight? Or have you been plotting against me for a long time? A wise man submits to circumstances. If I want to live a good life, I don't have to consider hugging someone else's thigh. After all, my husband is the thickest thigh in Haicheng. It would be a waste not to hug him. Furthermore, Jean Wan supported her chin with one hand, speaking into the phone. You've already swept away all the unnecessary obstacles on your thigh, leaving all the empty space for me. How could I not hug it? So, Mrs. Mo's change is because you've finally learned to be tactful? The man's voice deepened, and Jean Wan heard a pen lightly tapping on the table on his side. Inexplicably, he could feel a dangerous aura coming from the other side of the phone. Being tactful is secondary. What's important is that Boss Mo's wisdom, martial prowess, and handsomeness have deeply convinced me. Jean Wan raised her brows. And why don't you say that I've subdued you through sleeping with me? The man's tone was mild. Jean Wan was suddenly unable to refute. After all, she had indeed slept with him for one night. After waking up, she had completely changed. How else could she explain? She was completely speechless. Jean Wan decided to change the topic. I was just talking about the women you've had in the past. Don't talk about sleeping with me when you're so serious. You're my only woman. The identity of Mo Jingshan's wife is also unique to you. What else do you want to say? His tone carried a hint of a smile. Jean Wan was choked for a moment. This man's words always hit the nail on the head. There were no loopholes for her to retaliate. There were many things she wanted to say. She could not mention the things that had happened in her previous life and forced herself not to think about them. After all, she had not participated in those 10 years. Regardless of who Mo Jingshan was with, which woman he married, or whether he really kept Ji Menggran by his side, she had no right to ask about these things in her previous life. She wanted to ask why he chose her when he had so many choices before getting married. In his eyes, and Shuyan was nothing special. He could ignore her, and reject her. But with Mo Jingshan's personality, although the Mo family was powerful, they had no way of controlling Mo Jingshan's life and decisions. Why did he not reject the Ji family's marriage? Why didn't he reject her? In the past he had rejected Shuyan and many other socialites because of whom. Half a year ago, he had coincidentally accepted the Mo family's arrangement at that time. Jin Wan calmly suppressed the various thoughts in her heart, but her heart felt like it had been knocked over. He really wanted to ask, in fact he wanted to ask too many questions. She had not participated in Mo Jingshan's past and future for the past 10 years. She only felt that it was strange and even unreachable. It's already afternoon. I'll go take a look at the studio first. Jin Wan stood up as she spoke, handing the bills on the table to the waiter in the coffee shop. She took her phone and walked out of the coffee shop. You don't have to take Secretary An's words seriously. The foundation of marriage is trust. This word suits you and it suits me even more. Don't worry, don't think too much, N. Mo Jingshan heard her leaving the coffee shop and softly comforted her. Jin Wan softly made an N sound and did not say anything more. Don't forget what I promised you. 1 week. Jin Wan's footsteps paused. 1 week. There were only 3 days left from the 1 week he promised to let Shuyan leave the Mo Corporation. Was he really going to let Shuyan leave just like that? Although Jin Wan felt that she might be making a mountain out of a molehill, when it came to matters of the heart, women really could not tolerate the slightest bit of sand. Bottom lines and principles, she still had to uphold them. All right, she responded. The company will be busy these 2 days. There are many things that I need to personally discuss. There will be an international collaboration dinner the night after tomorrow. It will also be very late. I'll have Andy Chen accompany you. It's fine. I can do it myself. There's no need to call her over. The sky gradually darkened. Jin Wan returned to Aolan International. When she came out of the study with the notebook she used for work, she was about to return to the bedroom to continue reading. Her gaze swept past the door that had never been opened, and her footsteps paused. There was a sudden knock on the door. Jin Wan's gaze moved away from the tightly shut door. Andy Chen? She opened the door and saw that Andy Chen was standing outside with a fresh fish and vegetables. Madam, I didn't disturb you by coming at this time, did I? Andy Chen asked. No, but why would you? Sir asked me to prepare dinner for you, lest you slack off at night and only eat takeout. Andy Chen entered with a smile. After entering, she went into the kitchen to wash her hands. She was so busy that she did not even have time to exchange a few words with Jin Wan. When did Mo Jingshan understand her so well? Although she knew how to cook, there was really not much to prepare for dinner alone. Based on her personality, it was likely that she would really order takeout or just not eat at all. Madam, is there anything else you want to eat? Since it's not completely dark yet, I can go buy some other ingredients, Andy Chen said in the kitchen as she busied herself. I'm fine with anything. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Although this is downtown, I'm still not used to the surrounding environment. Earlier, I finally found a nearby vegetable market, but I didn't buy anything else. The things in the big supermarkets are too expensive. I think Madam should go back to the U Garden to live occasionally. Living here every day, even eating is a problem, Auntie Chen nagged, full of concern. Jin Wan, however, smiled. She really did eat a lot. After all, Boss Missouri had personally fed her. She felt that her face had become rounder these days. Jin Wan wanted to go into the kitchen to help but was pushed out by Auntie Chen. She had no choice but to pour a glass of water for Auntie Chen and return to the study with the computer. At around 11 o'clock p.m., Mo Jingshan returned to Aolan International. Mr. Mo, it's so late. You didn't stay in the company to rest? Auntie Chen came out and asked respectfully. Mo Jingshan nodded to Auntie Chen and did not say much. Auntie Chen suddenly pointed to the study room that was still lit and said softly, Madam has been in the study since dinner. I didn't dare to disturb her. Mo Jingshan walked in and opened the door to find that Jin Wan had fallen asleep by the computer. Her arms were on the table and her head was pillowed on them. Her beautiful brows were slightly furrowed, and it seemed that she was not sleeping well. Chapter 94. When Jin Wan woke up, it was already past 7 in the morning. Mo Jingshan's figure was no longer on the bed. She did not remember when she returned to the bedroom last night. Right now, her clothes had been changed into her usual nightgown. It couldn't be that Auntie Chen had the strength to carry her in and help her change her clothes, right? Auntie Chen. Jin Wan grabbed her slightly messy hair as she walked out. Jing Shin came back last night? That's right, madam. Mr. Mo came back very late last night. Mo Jingshin had clearly told her that the company would be busy these few days and had specially asked Auntie Chen to accompany her. In the end, he was so busy that he returned to Aolan International. She did not know if the distance between Mo Jingshin's heart and hers was close or far. At this moment, Jin Wan felt that perhaps she really should not be affected by Secretary An's words. There was no need to think about such things. She was simply worrying over nothing. That's right, Mr. Mo also said that in the future, madam, you must return to the bedroom to sleep before 10. You're not allowed to work so late in the study or stay up late. He also said that I must watch over you. Auntie Chen smiled as she spoke. Her eyes were filled with gratification. She felt that although Sir and Madam did not return to the Yew Garden to stay, the relationship between husband and wife seemed to be improving. Jin Wan scratched her hair again and nodded. I understand. After speaking, she returned to the bathroom in the bedroom to wash up. Mo Corporation CEO's office. In front of the clear floor-to-ceiling windows, Mo Jingshin had one hand in his pocket as he listened to Secretary N. Shin Mu talk about the project report from America's Shine. After the two finished speaking and left, the office returned to silence. Mo Jingshin remained standing in front of the window without moving. His phone rang. Mo Jingshin picked it up and heard Qin Siding speak with a hint of a smile. I heard that Mo Corporation has finally accepted Shine Group's invitation to collaborate with them. They want to develop a large multinational capital chain. It's a rather large project? Do you have any objections? Mo Jingshin's voice was low and indifferent. I'm not interested in your merciless business. Of course I have no opinion. Qin Siding sneered coldly. But ever since you established the Mo Corporation, you never planned to take over the Shine Group in the US. Your father is middle-aged but still smart and strong, so he shouldn't be in a hurry to hand over the foundation of the Mo family to you. But this time, the Mo Corporation and the Shine Group have made such a big move. Let me guess, what's the reason that made you, the young master of the Mo family who originally planned to be free and unfettered outside, start to draw in the net step by step? This step was destined to happen sooner or later. When the time is right, what scheme can you come up with? Mo Jingshin's voice was cold. Are you very free? I'm not idle. I'm so busy. Qin Siding snorted. Do you know how difficult the medical environment is now? I stay in the consulting room in the operating theater all day, facing all the distressed patients, controlling the life and death of the scalpel. I'm afraid the pressure is even greater than you, the C. Mo Jingshin's voice was low and cold. You choose your own path. If you want to practice medicine and save the world, no one is forcing you to do it. Who would have guessed that the young master of the Qin family chose medical school because he was tricked into it by a little girl? In the end, that girl left so heartlessly and decisively, leaving you in the abyss of bitterness for so many years without being able to struggle out. The other side of the phone was silent for more than 10 seconds. Suddenly, the sound of Qin Siding throwing a medical record on the table could be heard. Nan Hung and I exist just to be mocked by you. Every day we watch you and Jin Wan show off your love. Not only do we eat dog food until we're full, we also have to be poked by you until we can't stop the bleeding for 10,000 years, right? Mo Jingshin indifferently snorted. You asked for it. Qin Siding released a mocking laugh. I'll see when you taste the feeling of being kicked by your own woman, and when you can't even find her, Nan Hang and I will definitely return these 3 words to you. 3 words, 3 knives, 1 knife at a time, stabbing into your heart. You're becoming less and less like a physician. Then what do I look like? Psychiatry suits you. All right, when you're kicked by Jin Wan, the first patient I'll accept in the psychiatry department will be you. Qin Siding sneered. All right, I'll be serious with you. Recently, the Sheng family hasn't been peaceful. The 2 successors have basically been crippled. The illegitimate son who has been away for so many years is most likely going to completely change the sky of the Sheng family when he returns. I only found out now that the Sheng family's illegitimate son is actually in the same line of work as me. Last year we even met at the provincial medical conference. He really hid himself deeply. Mo Jingshin was not surprised. His tone was indifferent and cold. A knife operator who can easily cut apart 206 bones in a human body without leaving any flesh behind, killing his way into the business world is not something worth celebrating. TSK, since you know, I won't share this news with you. Qin Siding's laughter was cold. However, you should be careful of this kind of person who is good at hiding. After all, I also just found out that he has quite a deep relationship with Jinwan. As soon as Qin Sighting finished speaking, Mo Jingshan hung up the phone mercilessly. Qin Sighting. The next day when Jinwan woke up, she still did not see Mo Jingshan. Auntie Qin said that he still returned very late and left very early. She directly drove to Mo Nwan's studio. In the past few days she had already shaved away most of the people in the studio. Those who remained were all silent out of fear. However, not everyone was afraid of her. After all, there were still some people who were waiting for her studio to close down, waiting to see her make a fool of herself. There were even people who harbored evil intentions. After returning from the studio, she went to Xia Tian's place. Unsurprisingly, she bumped into Dr. Sheng. The new ward you've arranged for Xia Tian is not bad. The environment and security are many times better than the previous one. Jinwan's words were considered a greeting, but her tone was very distant. Dr. Sheng coldly glanced at her. I really couldn't tell that you care more about your friend than your own little sister. My own little sister? Jinwan smiled faintly. Perhaps you don't know, but to me, Xia Tian and my so-called little sister, the roles they play in my life are as different as heaven and earth. Dr. Sheng's cold brows did not move. He only stared at her for a moment, his voice low and cold. In your life, what role do I play? Jinwan coldly looked at him and did not speak. Dr. Sheng had long guessed that she would refuse to answer. He removed his mask and placed it in the pocket of his white coat. His expression was stern. I've already fulfilled the request you made a few days ago. Tomorrow night, I'll be representing the Sheng family to attend a banquet. If you want to cut all ties with me, why don't you agree to a condition of mine? Jinwan faintly furrowed her brows. What condition? Chapter 95. Why should I promise you? The one who feels guilty is you, not me. Jinwan stared at him coldly. The man in front of her smiled faintly, his lips curving into a strange curve. Do you really think that Mo Jingshan doesn't know about our relationship? Don't you want to get rid of everything related to me? I don't need to explain my conditions to you. Jinwan really wanted to smash the bag in her hand into his face. She suppressed her anger, coldly asking, since I'm representing the Sheng family to attend the banquet, why do you want me to go? It has to be you. Why me? You'll know once you go. His lips curved slightly, his smile cold. He did not explain further, nor did he wait for Jinwan's agreement or rejection. He put on the surgical mask again and entered the ward next door. Jinwan lowered her eyes to look at the floor covered in the smell of disinfectant and fell into deep thought. Jinwan could not sleep for the entire night just because of a banquet she did not even know the reason for. She thought that she would finally be able to see Mo Jingshan when he returned tonight. In the end, when she finally fell asleep at 2 a.m., she did not see him return. The next day she slept until noon. Perhaps because she did not sleep well, her head hurt slightly. After showering, she changed her clothes and prepared to leave. However, the moment she reached the studio, she saw a silver-white car parked there. The car window rolled down, revealing the man's face. Although he was handsome because he rarely walked outside, he lacked the moisture of sunlight and often wore a surgical mask. As a result, he appeared slightly paler than the average good-looking man. Jinwan furrowed her brows, her gaze unhappy. How did you know I would come here? The expression of the man in the car did not change. He remained indifferent and cold. He glanced at Jinwan's businesslike attire, and an incomprehensible coldness and melancholy appeared in his eyes. Little girl, you've really grown up. Dr. Sheng. Jinwan coldly stood by the car door. Don't tell me that you've always been clear about my whereabouts. If that's the case, I'm afraid I'll call the police. The man watched her. Tonight you're my female companion. Aren't the 3 words Dr. Sheng a little too unfamiliar? Jinwan's smile was cold and her words were full of sarcasm. Sheng Yihan. When Sheng Yihan heard this form of address that he hadn't heard for a long time, his pale lips curled up slightly, but it was only for a moment before it disappeared. Yesterday, I didn't agree to attend that dinner with you. After a night of consideration, my answer is still that I won't go. Jinwan finished speaking and turned to leave without looking at him. However, just as he turned around, his vision suddenly darkened, and he almost stumbled forward. She hurriedly raised her hand to support herself against the street lamp beside her to barely stand. This morning he had a headache. Perhaps it was because of the bone-chilling autumn wind, the cold rain, and the cold air from the north. The autumn wind made people's headaches. The car door behind her opened, and her arm was immediately supported. She did not need to think to know who it was. A layer of goosebumps covered her body, and she flung the person behind her away as though she had been electrocuted. "Don't touch me." Sheng Yihan ignored her temper and reached out to hold her wrist. "What's going on? Are you not feeling well?" "Mind your own business." Jin Wan could not even be bothered to look at him. Seeing her resistance, Sheng Yihan let go of her. Seeing Jin Wan leaning against the street lamp, her expression did not look good. He said in an irresistible tone, "Go to the hospital." Jin Wan was about to say no, take a deep breath, and try to stand firm when her wrist was suddenly tightened. The man beside her pulled her to the car, opened the door and pressed her in. "What are you doing, You've had a cold body since you were a child. Don't you know it? Go to the hospital." Sheng Yihan directly locked the car door, not giving her a chance to get out. When he also sat in the car, Jin Wan coldly snorted. "Why do I have a cold body? Don't you know better than me? It's all because of you." Sheng Yihan's hand that had just reached for the steering wheel instantly tightened. His expression did not look good. He coldly said nothing, started the engine and drove. She could not resist and she did not have the strength to resist. Jin Wan simply leaned against the back of the seat. At first, she was highly focused on guarding against him, but the temperature in the car was moderate, and her head was uncomfortable. Unconsciously, she gradually closed her eyes. She didn't know how long she slept. It was not until Jin Wan felt her neck sore and painful that she slowly opened her eyes. The interior of the car was no longer as bright as it was during the day. She was still sleeping in the car, wearing a man's coat. The scent of medicine and disinfectant carried a faint smell. She froze and very sensitively she forcefully tore off the coat and threw it to the side. She sat up straight, looked up and saw that the lights were already on outside the car window. She didn't know where the car was parked. There were many cars passing by, and it seemed that the car had been parked in this parking space for a long time. She turned to see Sheng Yihan sitting in the driver's seat. Because she woke up, he directly turned his eyes to her, and she couldn't tell whether he was happy or angry. His cold eyes fell on her face. It was very dark in the car, but it was not difficult to see each other's expressions. Jin Wan frowned. "Didn't you say you would send me to the hospital? Where is this?" "We've been to the hospital." "You slept too deeply," Sheng Yihan said indifferently. "Your physique and resistance are not up to standard and you're afraid of the cold. The colder the weather, the more you need to wear. Doesn't Mo Jingshan even care about these things?" How could he not care? Mo Jingshan could not wait for her to dress like a bear every day before going out. If she wore any less, his gaze would be able to freeze her. However, there was no need to explain this to him. Jin Wan did not speak, only looking out the car window. She felt that this place seemed to be near a certain high-class hotel in High City. She looked up again. King's Court Hotel. Yesterday, Sheng Yihan had asked her to accompany him to a hotel in High City to attend a dinner party. Was it here? I've said it before. I won't go to any dinner party that has nothing to do with me. Why did you bring me here? Jin Wan said indifferently, reaching out to open the car door. Seeing that the car door could not be opened, she turned to look at him coldly. Sheng Yihan, you're still as despicable as before. Open the door. Sheng Yihan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He indifferently glanced at the passing cars, his tone calm. The dress I prepared for you is in the back. Go change. I'm not changing. Jin Wan glared at him. Open the door. He appeared as though he did not hear her, ignoring her rejection. He opened the car door on his side and got out, indicating that he wanted her to change alone in the car. Chapter 96. Jin Wan directly took out her phone to call the police. From the corner of her eyes, she suddenly saw a black limousine parked in front of the hotel. Two figures walked out and her fingers on her phone paused. When she saw the two figures clearly, Jin Wan's expression changed. It was Mo Jingshan and Shu Yan. A few days ago, Mo Jingshan had indeed told her over the phone that he would be attending a dinner tonight. Why would he appear here with Shu Yan? So, they were attending the same dinner? From afar, she saw the two of them alight at the same time. Today Shu Yan was dressed beautifully. She wore a white strapless gown. When they entered the hotel, Shu Yan, who followed closely by Mo Jingshan's side, suddenly raised her hand and held onto his arm. Jin Wan's mind instinctively reacted. That was, Mo Jingshan would definitely push her away. However, Mo Jingshan did not push her away. Jin Wan's heart was instantly pounded harshly. Her hand paused on the car window and did not move for a long time. The other side of the car window was suddenly knocked twice. The door was opened. Sheng Yihan looked at her, asking softly, "Are you sure you're not going in?" Jinwan turned her head. Some emotions flashed across her eyes, but they were well concealed. She wanted to ask him why he brought her here. However, when the words reached her lips, she felt that based on his personality, the answer he gave her might not be the truth. She might as well go see for herself. "Close the door. I'm changing," she angrily reprimanded. Sheng Yihan's lips curled into an imperceptible cold smile. The car door was closed again. As if to reassure her, he left the electronic car key in the car, giving her a chance to open the door and come out by herself after changing the car. Was he certain that she would not run away again? Jinwan secretly gritted her teeth. She reached out and took the bag from the backseat. She opened it and saw that it was a high-end box containing the gown. She impatiently opened it. 10 minutes later, Jinwan alighted from the car. "Do you think I'm still a teenage girl? It's actually a pink gown, and the hem is decorated with all kinds of feathers. I really wonder if you deliberately brought me to this kind of place to embarrass me," she complained with an unpleasant expression. Sheng Yihan took a look at her, and there was a flash of amazement in his cold eyes. Although Jinwan used to attend all kinds of banquets with her father, he had to admit that Jinwan's beauty was very low-key and gentle. It was not aggressive or lethal, but as long as she dressed up a little, her natural beauty was more attractive to men than her lethal beauty. "You're only 20, why can't you wear pink?" Sheng Yihan walked away from the car, his tone still cold, but when Jinwan glanced at the hotel with a dark expression, he casually said to her, "Very beautiful. Who would make a fool of themselves in such a place?" "You won't make a fool of yourself. After all, you win in appearance." This man, Sheng Yihan, was so annoying even when he was saying nice things. Jinwan didn't look at him. Fortunately, the length of the dress was just below her feet and could cover her flat shoes. There was a new pair of high heels in a bag under the back seat, but she didn't wear them. She was really not in the mood to wear them. "You didn't change your shoes?" He noticed that her height didn't change and asked, "Didn't you say I win in appearance?" Jinwan retorted coldly. Sheng Yihan didn't speak anymore but glanced at her dress again. She was more than 1.6 meters tall and had a slender figure. Her tight fit was perfect. Wearing such a dress, the length was just right. She really didn't need to wear a pair of heels that were more than 10 centimeters tall to look tall and slender like other women. He turned to the hotel and Jinwan followed. As she walked, she simply used a rubber band to tie up her long hair, which was scattered on her shoulders and back, into a slightly fluffy bun on the top of her head. Then she walked in with a plain face. Before entering the main entrance of the hotel, Sheng Yihan noticed that she was dressed simply for this kind of dinner party and said meaningfully, "I really didn't expect that the Ji family's eldest miss would one day be so crude." Jinwan held back a smile as she looked at the well-dressed people inside. Anyone who had gone through 10 years of hardship would not be able to be refined. Could it be that she would have to call a stylist to come over and style her before going in? If it was the Jinwan of the past, perhaps she would have done so. She didn't explain, and after entering she didn't plan to get too close to Sheng Yihan. King's Court Hotel was the largest 7-star hotel in Haicheng. There were already many people in the luxurious banquet hall, and there were many people dressed in fragrant clothes. Famous politicians and businessmen stood in groups of 3 to 5, raising wine glasses and toasting. It was so lively that Jinwan was deeply suspicious. With such a grand scene, just what kind of dinner party was this? Jinwan noticed that there were many guests speaking with American English accents in the banquet hall. From their English conversation, she could vaguely tell that they were the senior executives and important members of the Shine Group. And tonight, Shine Group officially signed a contract with the MO Corporation for an international cooperation project. Recently, MO Jingshan had indeed been busy with this matter. After listening for a while, Jinwan noticed Sheng Yihan's gaze on her and had no choice but to follow him inside. Several people were conversing and their voices landed in her ears. Shine Group was founded in Haicheng. After moving its headquarters to America more than 10 years ago, I didn't expect that the first international cooperation with a domestic company would actually be with the MO Corporation. No matter how you look at it, it's still our home. As expected, we should keep the goodies within our own fields. I heard that Director MO will also be here tonight? It's been many years since Director MO returned to Haicheng, right? The company headquarters in America needs him to oversee it. It's really been hard on him these past few years. Isn't that so? I heard that when CEO MO got married half a year ago, Director MO couldn't even find time to return to attend the wedding. He didn't even get to see his daughter-in-law. His sudden return this time is really sudden. Jinwan's heart was filled with an indescribable sense of unease. Director Mo? Mo Jingshan's father, Mo Xiaoza? She continued walking in. All of a sudden, from the corner of her eyes, she saw a tall and familiar figure. Jinwan turned to look in that direction. That person, that face. It was Mo Jingshan, that handsome face that caused one's hair to stand on end. He walked to the center of the banquet hall from the other side. The light and shadows disappeared, and his figure and appearance became clear inch by inch. He had cool and handsome brows, a high nose bridge and light lips. His facial features were like the work of God, perfect and impeccable. His cold lips were curved in an extremely bland and emotionless curve. Black trousers wrapped around his long and straight legs, without a trace of unkempt. Similarly, he wore a black handmade shirt that was expensive. The moment he appeared, he did not need to speak to immediately attract everyone's attention. Handsome and cold, bland and calm, as well as an unparalleled aloofness. Chapter 97. Mo Jingshan's expression was indifferent. It was impossible to discern his emotions and he did not respond. However, Shuyan still stood very close to him, tightly pressed against him. She was originally wearing a low-cut gown, elegant and sexy. She pressed against his arm as they walked into the crowd. Shuyan was clearly familiar with many of the people present. She greeted them with a smile and occasionally glanced gently at Mo Jingshan, causing everyone who saw this scene to unavoidably overthink things. Mo Jingshan's eyes were wide open. Jinwan stared in that direction. All of a sudden, Sheng Yihan stood by her side and handed her a glass of champagne. At the same time, he said in a voice only she could hear, "Tonight's theme has nothing to do with the Sheng family. However, my father has always been very interested in America's Shine Group's recent projects and asked me to investigate." Sheng Yihan's voice was indifferent, making it difficult to detect his emotions. Shine's foundation is in the Mo family, and it has been developing in America for many years. Its power and wealth cannot be underestimated. Especially Shine's current chairman, Mo Xiaoza. It is said that he is an extremely stubborn person. The daughter-in-law he has taken a liking to is clearly the one by Mo Jingshan's side. Jinwan forced herself to retract her gaze. She said unconcernedly, "This is a gathering place for the upper class and it's a dinner with Shine as its theme. There's nothing wrong with him bringing Secretarian along. After all, this Secretarian came from Shine." "Is that so?" Sheng Yihan took a sip of champagne, chuckling meaningfully by her ear. Mo Xiaoza hasn't returned to the country for many years. It's rare for him to come back. Tonight, many of the Mo family's people will be gathered here. As the rightful granddaughter-in-law of the Mo family, you were not invited. Even Mo Jingshan himself did not plan on bringing you along. Regardless of whether it's because of Shine's cooperation project or some other reason, in an occasion like tonight, his choice is definitely not you. Jinwan's grip on the glass tightened. She then coldly glanced at Sheng Yihan. Jinwan turned back and looked in that direction. However, she did not make a sound. Even as the crowd walked over, she remained where she was and did not approach. "You're not going?" Sheng Yihan coldly reminded. Jinwan's expression was not very good. Hearing the voice by her side, she smiled indifferently and pretended to be relaxed. "What for? There are too many people and I can't breathe. This place is pretty good." As she spoke, she finished the wine in the glass in one gulp and threw the glass into Sheng Yihan's arms. Without even looking at his expression, she casually picked up another glass of wine from the long table in the corner. She could feel that although Sheng Yihan's tone was mocking her, as if the more unhappy she was in this marriage, the happier he would be. But in fact, most of his attention was on everyone present. She knew very well how good Sheng Yihan was at hiding and how meticulous his thoughts were. Many years ago it was clear what kind of dangerous person he was. He was deeply hidden, had astonishing patience and was also a strategist. But right now she was really not in the mood to care about him. She had not planned to attend this banquet. If she had not seen Mo Jingshan she would never have come in. But now she suspected that she was wrong to come here. She really shouldn't have come. The cocktail in her mouth was a little sweet, but the alcohol content was obviously a little higher than the glass of champagne just now. She only took a sip and frowned. She looked down at the colorful liquid in the cup. There were some ice cubes that had not melted yet in the cup, so it was very cold. It was good for calming her burning heart. After drinking 3 or 4 glasses in a row, she saw many people of the Mo family were also present. She was not familiar with the people of Shine Group, but the Mo family was very familiar with her. Jinwan tried to keep herself in the dark in the corner so as not to be discovered. And from this distance, because the crowd was in front of her, she could no longer see what was going on with Mo Jingshan. She looked back at the front door of the hotel where several relatives and friends of the Mo family were talking and there were security guards at the door. If she left now, she would only attract attention. Sheng Yihan. Because Jin Wan had drunk some wine and was not good at drinking, her eyes were a little red. Although it was not obvious, the people around her could still see it. Sheng Yihan lowered his eyes to look at her, staring into her eyes. Jin Wan looked at him and said with a cold and mocking smile, "Although you haven't been in the Sheng family for so many years, you have long been preparing to return, haven't you? Enduring humiliation to bear the burden, enduring hardships to gain courage. You're really something, ah." The man did not speak, but his lips curved imperceptibly and coldly, looking into her slightly red eyes. "Your appetite is not small. You even have ideas about Shine and the Mo Corporation. Aren't you afraid of eating too much and being swallowed back?" Jin Wan coldly glanced at him, the mockery in her eyes deepening. Sheng Yihan's eyes gradually revealed an obvious sneer. "What can be more terrible than being swallowed back by love? I can even endure this kind of pain. What is there to be afraid of?" Jin Wan's expression did not change, but the coldness in her eyes deepened. It was as if she could see the scene of that young man being rejected by the Sheng family many years ago. After his mother married into the Ji family, he was expelled from the Ji family because of her, the eldest daughter of the Ji family. That young man's eyes were deep and profound when he finally looked at her. She coldly curved her lips and picked up another glass of wine, casually leaning against the table behind her, saying coldly, "That's your self-righteous love. It has nothing to do with me." Sheng Yihan only mildly curved his lips. Looking at her, he reached out and gently brushed past her cheeks that were slightly warm from the alcohol. Jin Wan instantly turned her face away in disgust and then coldly looked at him. "What are you doing? The first time I saw you, you were still the high and mighty young lady of the Ji family. Like a princess who despised everyone, you walked through the dazzling banquet hall. Then, behind your father's back, you hid in a corner and secretly tasted the wine. In the end, you got drunk and slept in a corner, your face as red as an apple. I went to carry you out, but you bit me." Jin Wan unconcernedly moved the glass away from her lips, coldly saying, "If it were now, I definitely wouldn't have bitten you. After all, you're too dirty." Her gaze was cold and sharp, and her words did not leave him any face. Jin Wan did not wish to continue this topic. Although the alcohol content of the wine at the banquet was not particularly high, she really could not hold her liquor. Furthermore, her mood was slightly affected, and she drank several types of wine mixed together. The headache she had during the day came again. Chapter 98. She turned around and quickly walked to another corner of the corridor that led to the washroom. A few people were discussing nearby. As expected, and Shu Yan really returned to the country for President Mo. Only President Mo could make this precious daughter of the Yin family fly over from so far away. This and Shu Yan is the best candidate for a daughter-in-law on Director Mo's side. They're a perfect match. I really don't know what Grandfather Mo was thinking. He actually let a woman whose name I've never even heard of enter the Mo family? No. That Jin Wan is quite famous in Hai Cheng's upper-class society. Her family background isn't bad, and it's said that she's very beautiful. I thought that I would be able to clearly see what kind of foxy beauty that Jin Wan actually has the ability to push aside so many young ladies from all over the country to marry into the Mo family. In the end, who would have thought that she didn't come? She's smart not to be here today. In today's situation, Director Mo definitely won't give her any face. Who knows, he might even find a way to teach her a lesson in front of everyone. As the CEO of Shine Group, he's basically the true ruler of the Mo family. If he wants to keep Shu Yan in the Mo family, today is the best time to make sure that Jin Wan doesn't get away scot-free. She definitely won't get any good results by coming here. That's true. Although a lot of people from the Mo family are here today, Grandfather Mo is not here. If Chairman Mo really wants to kick Jin Wan away, he has thousands of reasons to make her come in smiling and go out crying. Even if CEO Mo can protect her, he still has to consider the Yin family's face. This dilemma is really difficult for CEO Mo. What's there to be troubled about? According to President Mo's usual style of doing things, if he really wanted to protect his current wife, even if the heavens were present today, he wouldn't care. Did you really think that Director Mo could suppress him? This is the true strength of this father and son. It's just that they haven't had a direct confrontation yet. So what if that Jin Wan is beautiful? Although beauty is alluring, you'll still get tired of it after a while. I think he most likely has some interest in Shu Yan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given Shu Yan so much face and chosen her to be his female companion. Yes, President Mo has given the N family a lot of face today. Ha! Could it be that the Mo and N families would really come to an end? Then I'll be waiting to see what happens. Do you want to make a bet? I bet that Jin Wan will definitely be kicked out of the Mo family soon, and N Shuyan will naturally become Mrs. Mo. A rational person like President Mo would definitely make the wisest choice. After all, the N family is supporting him in the US. As long as he marries N Shuyan, it is equivalent to controlling half of the Chinese economy in the US. This will be more beneficial for President Mo when he takes over Shine Group in the future. With this kind of gambling method, why don't you just rob me? Do you think Jin Wan will be able to sit firmly in Mrs. Mo's position? Isn't he just waiting to lose? Jin Wan's headache worsened. She raised her hand to support herself against the wall. She really could not listen to him anymore. She expressionlessly turned and walked into the corridor. There was no one in the bathroom. She turned on the water and washed her face to wake herself up. Inside the banquet hall, Mo Xiaozi was chatting with people because he had just returned. Suddenly, a figure approached and whispered a few words in his ear. Director Mo, earlier on we saw that person from the Ji family. The expression on Mo Xiaozi's face changed slightly, but it was fleeting. He looked at the people beside him without batting an eyelid and said coldly in a voice that only they could hear, "She sure has the guts to come. Lock her inside and don't let her out until the banquet is over." After finishing his words, Mo Xiaozi turned his eyes, looking thoughtfully at Mo Jingshan, who was currently surrounded by several Shine Group executives on the red carpet with N Shuyan. CO Mo, Uncle Mo and my father seem to have finished chatting with the other elders. They're already walking toward us, and Shuyan softly said by Mo Jingshan's side. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He received a glass of wine from a waiter by the side, smiling mildly as he conversed with others. His true emotions could not be seen from his brows, but it caused N Shuyan to feel as though he was completely ignoring her. It was a taboo that she could not fathom his thoughts. N Shuyan's father and Mo Xiaozi had already approached. N Shuyan gently tugged on Mo Jingshan's arm, but in reality she could only tug on his sleeve. From the beginning to the end, although the two of them entered the banquet together, she was the one who took the initiative to hold on to him and stick to him. Not only did he not give her any response, but whenever there was any physical contact, even if it was just a touch of his hand, he did not give her the chance. Imperceptibly he maintained an appropriate distance. In the eyes of others this scene appeared very harmonious. Only N Shuyan knew the distance between her and Mo Jingshan. Jingshan, after Shuyan arrived in Haicheng, "It's all thanks to your care. If it weren't for her following you as her father, I would have long flown over to check on her condition because she's been away for too long." Father N chuckled. "With Shuyan by your side, I can still rest assured." Mo Jingshan appeared to have only just noticed the person approaching. He held a glass of wine in his hand, clinking it with Father An's. He smiled elegantly and mildly. "Uncle N, you're too polite. Shuyan has been spoiled rotten by us in America. She should still have a stubborn temper. It's rare for you to give me this face." Father N was in high spirits. From what I can see, although Haicheng's Mo Corporation has only been developing for a few years, it is truly a dark horse in the financial and technology industry. If it continues to develop like this, I estimate that in less than 10 years, it will be able to surpass Shine Group, which has a foundation of nearly 100 years. Father N smiled as he spoke to Mo Xiaozi by his side. Youngsters these days are all extraordinary, especially Jingshan. He hasn't even reached 30 years of age, but his achievements are already extraordinary. To have such a son, it really makes one extremely envious. You're too kind. Mo Jingshan's true emotions were hard to discern. His face was calm and light with a smile. Even if I cultivate for another few decades, I'm afraid I won't be able to compare to even a 10,000th of Uncle An's. Father N laughed, clinking his glass with him again. He then watched as his daughter continued to stand by Mo Jingshan's side, her smile dignified and magnanimous. They were truly a perfect match. Earlier Jin Wan had drunk some wine. After standing in the bathroom for a long time, she chose to open a door and enter. She sat on the toilet for a while and took out her phone to look at the time. She then discovered that there was no signal in the bathroom. After a while he suddenly heard some movement coming from outside. It was a rustling sound. Chapter 99. Jin Wan's entire body trembled. In the darkness and slightly damp bathroom, the surroundings were quiet and empty. She could vaguely hear the sound of water dripping. In the darkness, drop by drop, it caused one's heart to tremble. Also, what was that sound outside? It seemed to be very close. There was a sneaky movement. Jinwan reached out to push the door open but was surprised to find that the door could not be opened. Every single door in the bathroom could only be locked from the inside. The lock had already been opened by her. How could it be that the door could not be opened? A sense of unease suddenly rose in her heart. She raised her hand and knocked hard on the door, yelling, "Is anyone there?" It was impossible for the lights to break so coincidentally. The King's Court Hotel was a top-notch, high-class place, and it was hosting VIPs from America tonight. The staff here would definitely check every corner properly. There could not be a single mistake. Furthermore, the door was obviously locked from the outside. This could only mean that it was done by someone. Who exactly was it? Sheng Yihan definitely could not have done this. Bringing her here and then locking her up was contradictory. There was no motive, so it could not be him. Earlier, she had been hiding in the shadows in the banquet hall and did not meet anyone from the Mo family. No one should have noticed her, nor did she meet anyone who had a grudge with her. To be able to do such a thing in the heavily guarded King's Court Hotel? It was definitely not simple. There were no windows in the bathroom and the surroundings were well sealed. As the lights went out, the air conditioner also stopped working. The power should have been cut off. Jinwan's body had not been feeling well today. She did not know how long she would be locked up here. Earlier, she had shouted so loudly but no one had approached. It was likely that no one had heard her. She gradually took a step back, closing the toilet lid and sitting on it to conserve her energy. She picked up her phone. The light on the screen gave her some sense of security. She was brought here too suddenly by Sheng Yihan. She did not have time to charge her phone. Right now it only had 4% battery. There was no signal and the battery was almost out. She repeatedly turned on her phone, watching the time pass. Until the phone screen automatically darkened. At the banquet, Mo Jingxin and Mo Xiaozi chatted for a while. At this moment, and Shuyan had already been called to the side by Father N. The father and daughter conversed softly. Not long after, Father N and Shuyan came back. Mo Jingxin turned around, his voice heavy as he spoke to Father N. I remember that when Shu Yen was young, she was engaged to the eldest son of the Wilson family. Later on, because their family moved to England, they never mentioned this matter again. The smiles on Father N and in Shu Yan's faces instantly froze. Mo Jingxin smiled mildly. Now that the Weizhen family has returned to America and has an inseparable relationship with the Yin family's company, Shu Yan and Mr. Weizen's eldest son has yet to marry, and there aren't any suitable candidates by his side. In my opinion, why don't our Mo family act as the matchmaker and facilitate the marriage between the two families? And Shuyan's complexion was slightly pale. She stared in disbelief at the composed Mo Jingxin. As Mo Jingxin spoke, Mr. Weizen, who was also present today, stood by the side. Hearing his words, he turned around and laughed in not very fluent Chinese. Haha, that engagement was set on Miss N's 5th birthday. After so many years, Mr. N must be forgetful and unwilling to let his daughter marry too early, so I didn't bring it up again. And Shuyan was silent for less than a second before speaking up. Uncle Weizen, I read that Shuyan is currently at a suitable age for marriage. Mr. Weizen's family also lives with the Yin family in New York. Even if she marries over, she won't be too far from home. Mo Jingxin's gaze was deep, and his face held a perfect smile that no one could find fault with. He interrupted her words. I heard that when the engagement was first set, New York's mayor was also present. Right now, the other party is already a high-ranking official in New York. If he were to personally host Shu Yan's wedding, it would really be the best. Father N furrowed his brows, concealing the flash of displeasure in his eyes. This matter has already been going on for 20 years. The Weizen family and the Yin family have been friends for 20 years. Not only are we business partners, but the elders are also close friends. Isn't it appropriate to arrange the marriage as soon as possible? Mo Jingxin smiled, turning to look at Mr. Weizen, who had already entered the conversation. Mr. Weizen clinked his glass with Mo Jingxin's, speaking politely in not very fluent Chinese. Miss N is really too outstanding. If she can really marry over, of course we'll be honored. But we're afraid that it will be hard on Miss N. After all, our family has been through a lot in England a few years ago, and it's not as good as before. And Shuyan bit her lip hard. Her gaze moved from the smiling Mr. Weizen's face to Mo Jingxin's. Mo Jingxin's every word rendered her speechless. Furthermore, Mr. Weizen's emotions had already been stirred up by him. Right now, if she were to say a single word of rejection, she would offend the Weizen family. Right now, Mr. Weizen's hesitant attitude showed that he clearly wanted her to marry over, yet he was purposely lowering his stance. Mr. Weizen, you're really being too humble. Your word's not as good as before. How many financial tycoons will be unable to raise their heads? Mo Jingshan appeared to be unintentionally leading the conversation. He smiled lightly. When Xu Yan was young, she came to Haicheng and temporarily stayed with the Mo family. However, because she was not acclimatized, she was brought back to America for treatment. I noticed that she seemed to have lost a lot of weight recently. I'm guessing that she's still unable to adapt to life in the country. Xiao Mo. And Xu Yan opened her mouth. Mo Jingshan smiled mildly at her. I know that your thoughts are all on your career, but you've indeed reached the age where you should get married. After the contract is signed, the two of you can head back to America together. Once the wedding is confirmed, remember to inform me. And Xu Yan's expression turned paler and paler. She stared at him, her slender fingers tightly gripping her skirt. Under this man's calm and smiling gaze, there was too much shrewdness hidden, causing one to be caught unprepared. Right now, and Xu Yan's father's expression was extremely ugly. However, due to the fact that Mo Jingshan had given Xu Yan and the family enough face today, his words were also impeccable. It really left one with nowhere to vent their anger, much less any reason to vent it. Mo Shaoza furrowed his brows, coldly watching everything. In his heart, he knew that his own son had turned the tables on him. He was already extremely unhappy. No wonder Mo Jingshan was so cooperative. He only had one goal tonight, and that was to send Xu Yan back to America. He also wanted to pair Xu Yan up with the others. Chapter 100. Mo Jingshan's actions seemed to have sealed off Xu Yan's path of retreat without batting an eyelid. Such a reversal happened in the blink of an eye. No one had expected it, nor were they prepared for it. Just like that, she was pushed away by Mo Jingshan. Following that, Mo Jingshan casually chatted with Mr. Weizen for a while, recommending a friend he had in America who specialized in wedding ideas. It was clear that this matter had already been decided. Father-in wanted to say something, but Mo Jingshan had already softly chatted with a local Haicheng company manager behind him, ending the previous topic. And Xu Yan secretly pinched her skirt. Because Mr. Weizen was by her side, she could not display too much negative emotions. She forced herself to say calmly, I'm not feeling too well. I'm going to the restroom. As she spoke, she turned and quickly walked toward the restroom. In the end, when she approached the corridor leading to the restroom, she saw that it was dark inside. She then saw the bodyguard who often followed by Uncle Mo's side standing nearby. The bodyguard turned back to look at her and signaled for her to leave with his eyes. And Xu Yan stared at the darkness inside, then looked in the direction of the female restroom. Strangely, she seemed to have guessed something. Her footsteps paused for a moment before she slowly retreated and turned to walk away. It was only when Xu Yan's footsteps staggered in another direction from the back of the crowd that Mo Jingshan raised his eyes and noticed a flash of nervousness on her face. Although she hid it well, he could still sense that something was amiss. Right now, Xu Yan's hands and feet were cold. Her eyes were dim as she followed the staff down to the second floor. From the day Mo Jingshan told her to leave the Mo Corporation in 4 days, she knew that once he made up his mind, there would be no turning back. Originally, she had wanted to take advantage of the cooperation with Shine Group to stay by his side for a while longer. However, she didn't expect that the reason he asked her to be his female companion today was to give face to the family before he mercilessly chased her back to the United States, leaving her father and Uncle Mo speechless. And Xu Yan stood by the railing on the second floor, avoiding the crowd's gaze. She picked up her phone and called Mo Jingshan. She could not return to America like this. Everything that had happened tonight meant that if she returned, it would be difficult for her to get close to him again. Mo Jingshan looked at the caller ID and did not pick it up. When the phone stopped vibrating, there were no more calls. The phone fell silent. Mo Jingshan raised his eyes. Because of Xu Yan's earlier nervous expression, he thoughtfully scanned the entire banquet hall. Suddenly his phone vibrated again. This time it was Andy Chin calling. Mo Jingshan's brows moved as he picked up the call. Mr. Mo, did Madam go to your company tonight? Andy Chin sounded worried. She didn't go back? No, it's already so late and Madam hasn't come back yet. I thought she might have gone to your company to look for you. Her phone is still turned off and I haven't been able to contact her. Mo Jingshan's gaze quickly scanned the area. His gaze was deep and it was hard to tell if he was happy or angry. At this moment, a staff member in the banquet hall suddenly reminded, "Distinguished guests, I'm really sorry. The washroom in the banquet hall on the first floor has a circuit failure and cannot be used for the time being. Please move to the second floor or other floors later. The washroom on the first floor is currently closed. It was just a reminder from the staff, and it was just a malfunction in the washroom. It didn't affect anything in the banquet hall. The banquet continued. At this moment, and Shuyan had already returned. Hearing the staff member's reminder, her gaze shifted in Mo Jingshan's direction. Mo, can we have a chat? I don't want to return to America. She approached him and spoke softly. Mo Jingshan did not look at her. Instead, he indifferently turned around, his gaze fixed in the direction of the washroom. The figure who, because of the staff member's words, had suddenly moved in the opposite direction of the washroom. It was Sheng Yihan who had unknowingly appeared in the banquet hall. And Shu Yan stood in front of him, only to discover that the man's gaze was currently examining her. It was heavy and carried with it an oppressive feeling that caused one to tremble. Mo Jingshan was the type of person who, when one looked at him, would make one involuntarily think of a tree covered in frost when all things were withering in the winter. He stood elegantly in the cold snow, clean, distant, and even cold to the point of being inhuman. However, because he was too good-looking, there was a hint of fickleness to him. However, at this moment, the expression that had always been hidden beneath the high collar of his cultured appearance was no longer as good as before. His lower jaw was slightly taut, and his brows were like the thin snow on the summit of a mountain. It was as though he had torn away the noble and friendly facade of a Vanity Fair, transforming into an icy arrow filled with killing intent. It was as though he would pierce through everything in the next second. And Shu Yan subconsciously raised her hand to grab his sleeve, wanting to make him stay by her side. She stared at him and said in a low voice, Mo, Uncle Mo and my father are calling for you. Mo Jingshan's gaze was frighteningly cold. And Shu Yan's brows furrowed, and her grip on his sleeve tightened. Mo. Let go. Mo Jingshan's cold and heavy voice rang out. Without waiting for Shu Yan's response, he directly pulled his arm out, expressionlessly heading in the direction Sheng Yihan had left. And Shu Yan stood stiffly in her spot. She then rushed to lift her skirt and follow. Mo, long time no see. I wonder. Someone by the side saw Mo Jingshan and approached to greet him. Excuse me. Mo Jingshan did not turn back and directly walked past. His gaze was slightly heavy. Mo. And Shu Yan saw that he was about to walk in that direction and was afraid that what she was worried about and suspected had come true. She rushed to grab his wrist forcefully. Tonight is an important banquet for the Mo Corporation and Shine Group. Earlier on, the staff already said that the bathroom on the first floor cannot be used. Right now, there's no one there. However, Mo Jingshan coldly pushed her away. And Shu Yan staggered, reaching out to grab his arm to steady herself. The moment she raised her hand, the man had already walked far away. Everyone in the banquet hall looked over because of the commotion. When Mo Shaoza saw the direction Mo Jingshan was heading toward, his gaze was cold as he heavily slammed the unfinished wine glass in his hand onto the waiter's tray. His brows furrowed harshly. Hearing this, Sheng Yihan turned back. His cold and indifferent gaze met Mo Jingshan's. As their gazes met, it was like the collision of icebergs at the North Pole. Sheng Yihan's footsteps suddenly paused in front of the bathroom door. A pensive expression flashed past his face, and his lips curved in an unfathomable smile. Mo Jingshan approached, his expression indifferent. It seems like this Mo has not been a good host for tonight's banquet. The hotel's bathroom actually malfunctioned. Why don't Mr. Sheng head to the second floor? This Sheng is untalented. I haven't even officially taken a step into the business world, but CEO Mo has already remembered my name and recognized me at a glance. Sheng Yihan's tone was light and slow, making it difficult for others to hear his emotions. Chapter 101. What happened? Mo Jingshan's sharp, cold gaze shifted from the direction of the dark bathroom to Shu Yan by his side. And Shu Yan did not expect he would actually ask her. This man's observational skills and thoughts were too meticulous to such a frightening degree. I'm not sure. And Shu Yan knew she could not hide it any longer and could only softly say, earlier on I wanted to go to the bathroom but I felt that this place was not too normal. Just not too normal? Mo Jingshan coldly chuckled. And Shu Yan, do you not wish to return to America safely? And Shu Yan's expression was so stiff that it seemed as though it was about to crack. She lowered her eyes. I'm really not too sure. Mo Jingshan did not pay any more attention to her. His cold gaze once again landed on Sheng Yihan. Sheng Yihan did not plan on wasting any more time. A trace of worry could still be seen in his eyes. He slowly said, Jinwan entered the bathroom 25 minutes ago. She still hasn't come out. The moment his words landed, and Shuyan instinctively reached out to hold onto the man's arm. Before her hands could touch him, Mo Jingshan's figure was already several steps away from her. Seeing that the bathroom door was actually locked, Mo Jingshan's jaw tightened. His Adam's apple moved up and down, and his black eyes were so heavy that it seemed as though they could drip water. The moment the bathroom's heavy alloy door was kicked open, the hot bathroom emitted a wave of dampness due to the lack of air conditioning for a long time. Mo Jingshan's brows furrowed tightly. All the doors in the bathroom were left ajar because there was no one inside. Only the innermost door was tightly shut. Hearing the noise, the hotel staff rushed in with a temporary searchlight. After being glanced at by Mo Jingshan's cold gaze, they rushed forward to help open the door. The moment the door opened, they saw Jinwan, who was dressed in a pink gown, sitting on the toilet seat. Her head was weakly pressed against the wall, and her hands were by her side. The hair on her forehead was wet with sweat and her eyes were closed. Her face was as pale as paper, and her lips were completely drained of blood. She had already fallen unconscious. And Shuyan followed behind. Seeing this scene, her brows furrowed. This was because Jinwan's complexion was frighteningly pale. Why is there still someone in the bathroom? The staff members who were not involved in this matter stood at the side in shock and whispered, "How long has he been unconscious? Hurry up and call the doctor, don't let anything happen to him." Before the staff member had finished speaking, Mo Jingshan had taken off his suit coldly and carried Jinwan out. She was cold and her dress was damp from the suffocation. He wrapped half of her body in his suit, which still contained his body heat, and quickly carried her up. The moment he walked out of the restroom, Mo Xiaozu was already standing outside the door with a frosty expression. Xiaozu's coldness flashed across Mo Jingshan's eyes. Without hesitation, he carried Jinwan and quickly walked past him. When he passed by Shenmu, who was rushing over, he coldly said, "Call Qin Siding and have him scram over here immediately." Shenmu was still confused, not knowing what had happened. When he saw Jinwan's pale face, he rushed to nod. "I'll inform Dr. Qin immediately." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and saw Sheng Yihan standing at the back of the crowd with a thoughtful look on his face. Shenmu thought to himself, "Isn't there a ready-made doctor in front of me?" An orthopedic doctor was still a doctor. However, he did not dare to say these words right now. Otherwise he would not even know how he died. Even if the most eye-catching people tonight were Shine Group and Mo Xiaozu, the true head of the Mo family, Mo Jingshan's existence in Haicheng could not be ignored. Although he rarely appeared at such banquets and kept a low profile, causing people to be unable to figure out his private life, Mo Jingshan's status in the business world was truly not to be underestimated. Anyone who was involved in the business world, regardless of whether it was in the country or abroad, would definitely pay attention to his every move. Everyone in Haicheng knew that Mo Jingshan's personality was cold and aloof. He was difficult to approach. Aside from his immediate family and friends, no one could easily interact with him. Most people only dared to approach him to exchange pleasantries. To receive a polite smile from him was already considered an honor. A few months ago, there were even rumors that after Mo Jingshan's marriage with the Ji family, he and his new wife, Jinwan, did not have any relationship. Most insiders believed that he would definitely divorce and marry someone else. However, at this moment in the bright and resplendent banquet hall, everyone stared at this scene in shock. Mo Jingshan's usual calm and composed expression changed. His brows were cold and threatening. Not only was it rare to see such a clear expression of coldness and anger on his face, they also saw him carrying a woman dressed in a pink gown through the banquet hall with quick steps. Furthermore, this woman was actually the Mrs. Mo who had been rumored by the media to be thrown into the cold palace, Jinwan. Most of the people present recognized Jinwan's face, which was so beautiful that it could make even the heavens angry. However, her usually bright complexion was currently excessively pale. And Xu Yin, who had just been the subject of discussion about the possibility of marrying into the Mo family, followed closely behind him with a dark expression on her face. However, she seemed to be completely ignored by him, and he did not even spare her a glance. Co Mo and Xu Yin followed closely behind Mo Jingshan. "Mrs. Mo's gown needs to be changed. I brought a spare set of clothes over. Let me help her change." "There's no need." Mo Jingshan's gaze was so cold that it could instantly freeze water into ice. And Xu Yin's footsteps instantly froze. Her expression finally could not hold it in any longer. The guests in the banquet hall were shocked that Mo Jingshan would actually be angered to such an extent for Jin Wan. He did not even give In Shuyen the slightest bit of face. The news that In Shuyen was about to marry into the Mo family was instantly destroyed by Mo Jingshan. After making the call, Shenmu turned back to see Mo Xiaoza approaching with a dark and cold expression. Director Mo, Shenmu respectfully nodded toward him. Mo Xiaoza angrily said, "Since she fainted, just send her to the hospital. Why did you call Qin sighting over at the hotel? Do you think the commotion here isn't big enough? Are you afraid that the guests won't be able to see enough?" Shenmu was silent for several seconds before seriously saying, "I'm sorry, Director Mo. I've always been by CEO Mo's side. I'm used to listening to his orders." Mo Xiaoza coldly narrowed his eyes. Shenmu continued, "Right now, most of the doctors in the nearby hospitals have already left work. There are only emergency doctors and doctors on duty. Everyone in Haiqing knows about Dr. Qin's medical skills. COMO definitely has his own considerations for calling him over. Furthermore, the banquet hasn't ended yet. If COMO directly abandons all the guests and leaves, it might cause more people to feel uncomfortable." Mo Xiaoza's expression was ugly as he stared at him. Shenmu did not wait for him to speak and politely and respectfully nodded toward him. "Dr. Qin has already driven over here. I'll wait for him at the door." Chapter 102. Jin Wan had not fainted for too long. She was already feeling unwell and there was no fresh air in the bathroom. The enclosed space made it difficult for her to breathe. She did not know how she had suddenly fainted. She struggled in the nightmare for a long time. The nightmares from her previous life that had not appeared for a long time were invading her consciousness. Until her body suddenly felt as though it had been soaked in a pool of warm water. Her cold body gradually warmed up, and the uneasiness in the nightmare gradually faded. Below her neck, there seemed to be a strong hand holding the back of her neck. From time to time, her forehead would be covered by another hand as though testing her temperature. So warm, so comfortable, was this also a dream? Abruptly, Jin Wan opened her eyes. Her gaze seemed to have lost focus. After opening them for a long time, she slowly returned to herself. She turned her head slightly in a daze, looking at the man by the bathtub. The moment she saw Mo Jingshan's face so close to hers, her heart instantly jumped. She watched as the man's brows were tightly furrowed. His gaze was cold and stern, and his hand was still pressed against her forehead. She was startled. She saw that his suit was thrown on the ground not far from the bathroom. The buttons on his shirt were undone from time to time, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing his wrists. However, because he had been using both hands to hold her in the bathtub to prevent her from choking, his sleeves were more or less soaked. However, he did not seem to mind. His gaze was heavy, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. For a moment, Jin Wan could not wrap her head around it. Wasn't she locked in the bathroom? Didn't he not notice that she had come to this banquet? How could it be? She suddenly woke up and she was right in front of him. Furthermore, he had taken off her clothes and she was lying in the bathtub just like that? The bathroom door was tightly shut. Various footsteps could be heard from outside, and In Shuyan's voice could be heard from outside. "COMO, the clothes I brought are new. Do you want Mrs. Mo to change first?" Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear the voices outside. His cold gaze landed on Jin Wan's pale face. "If you want to come to the banquet, why didn't you directly ask me? What's the meaning of this?" Jin Wan finally gradually returned to herself. The alcohol in her mind continued to wreak havoc, causing her to feel uneasy. Outside, and Shuyan was still gently knocking on the door. Jin Wan was silent for a moment before smiling faintly. Her eyes were a little misty from intoxication. "You can come together with Shuyan. Why can't I find someone else?" She did not explain how she came here, nor did she want to explain. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt the man's hand on the back of her neck become full of thorns, and she began to struggle to sit up. "Don't move." Mo Jingshan's voice was low and heavy. His gaze was clear and indifferent as he pressed down on her. "Earlier on, the bathroom was damp and humid. Your body temperature is too low. Soak in the hot water for a while longer." "I'm fine now. Maybe it was just some difficulty breathing before, but I'm much better now." Jin Wan spoke unhurriedly and sat up in the bathtub. She raised her hand to push his hand away, but he held her wrist instead. She struggled again, but to no avail. She could only look up. "I said I'm much better now." She raised her voice. She saw that the man's gaze was fixed on her, not allowing her to avoid him at all. Jin Wan tried hard to calm herself down, but she was still slightly dizzy from the alcohol. I didn't come tonight on purpose. Furthermore, even if I wanted to come, I'm afraid there's no place for me by your side. The reason I didn't bring you to this dinner party was because I didn't want you to misunderstand. Mo Jingshan more or less softened his tone, but his hand still held onto her wrist without loosening. Oh, I really didn't misunderstand. Jin Wan lowered her head, no longer looking at him. Mo Jingshan saw that she was sitting in the water. It seemed like she really did not plan to continue soaking. He casually pulled a towel over her head and helped her dry her dripping hair. Jin Wan turned her head away to avoid his hand. She raised her hand to press down on the towel on her head. I'll do it myself. The man did not speak. His actions continued until he carried her out of the bathtub. At the same time, he pulled over another towel that was larger and wider enough to wrap around her body. He wrapped it around her and carried her out of the bathroom. Jin Wan did not speak the entire time. Only when she was placed on the bed did she instinctively curl up her legs and hide in the bed, invisibly maintaining a distance from him. It could be seen that even though she did not argue, her emotions were already filled with negative emotions. Mo Jingshan pulled the blanket over her, forcing her to lie under it. He then pressed his hand against her forehead and looked at her, speaking solemnly and softly, "Qin Sighting will be here soon. I've already asked someone to buy a new set of clothes for you. Lie here and rest first." Jin Wan could tell from this suite that this should be the guest room on the upper floor of King's Court Hotel. There were still hundreds of guests in the banquet hall on the first floor. Tonight was an important dinner party between Mo Corporation and Shine Group. Since she was fine right now, he should take some time to deal with the aftermath. She did not speak and closed her eyes. She did not even want to make a sound. She did not even want to hear a single word of his advice. Wan. The man stood by the bed. His clear and deep voice called out her name. Jin Wan appeared as though she did not hear him. She closed her eyes and did not speak. She did not move, but her hand gripped onto the towel wrapped around her body. Her grip gradually tightened. How much wine did you drink earlier? Mo Jingshan stared at her. Earlier, when he carried her into the room, he could smell the scent of several different wines mixed on her body. Although the alcohol content of the wine prepared for the dinner party was not high, the fact that Jin Wan's alcohol tolerance was very low was known by the entire upper class of Haicheng. She would definitely get drunk after drinking a few glasses. He had seen this a long time ago without her knowing. Furthermore, today there were several types of wine mixed together. Seeing that she was still using the excuse of being drunk to throw a tantrum, Mo Jingshan placed her handbag on the bedside table. He picked up the phone that had run out of battery and glanced at it. After confirming that it was indeed out of battery, he placed it down. Be good and rest in the room. Wait for me to come back. After speaking, the man glanced at her again. Seeing that she was currently half drunk and could not cause any trouble, he directly left the room. Outside the room, and Shuyan saw that he had finally come out and rushed forward. "Sio Mo, how is Mrs. Mo? Is she alright?" However, Mo Jingshan's expression was cold. He did not pay her any attention and walked down the stairs. Half an hour later, the banquet hall seemed to have returned to normal. Mo Jingshan walked through the crowd. His expression was still calm and impeccable. However, his gaze did not move toward Shuyan. Even when Shuyan walked over to seek his gaze, the look she received made her tremble as though she was sitting on pins and needles. Qin Sighting had already arrived. He suddenly approached Mo Jingshan's side and softly mocked, "This old man drove 180 miles per hour to rush over, but your woman is not in the room at all." Mo Jingshan's gaze hardened. His silent and cold gaze subconsciously scanned the entire banquet hall. He suddenly laughed coldly. Chapter 103. In the room, the towel was tossed onto the bed. Jin Wan's cell phone and other items remained untouched on the bedside table. The room service staff explained by the side, "Earlier on, I only brought the clothes I bought for Mrs. Mo and then went to clean the other rooms. I didn't notice the commotion here." Qin Sighting crossed his arms and leaned against the door. He snorted. "Since you still have the ability to slip away, I think your woman should be fine. Based on her physical condition, aside from her fear of the cold, she doesn't have any other problems. She's very healthy." As he spoke, Qin Sighting raised his chin, using his gaze to point toward the window. "Isn't that right? She still has the strength to jump out of the window." Mo Jingshan had long noticed the open window and the fluttering curtains. His expression did not reveal the slightest hint of anger. His gaze was indifferent, as though he did not have any emotions. Qin Sighting appeared eager to watch the show. He walked to the window and casually glanced outside, chuckling softly. No wonder she didn't take the usual route today. There's a very tall tree outside the window. A child can jump down without getting hurt. In a bar half a city away from King's Court Hotel. Jean Wan sat in a secluded corner. The wine glasses on the table were arranged in a row. She had drunk 2 glasses. Was not bad. She raised her hand to rub her nose, expressionlessly reaching for another glass. This was a leisure bar, a type of bar. Most of the customers were refined people who listened to music and drank. It was not as messy as ordinary bars. Not far away, there was only a young man hugging a guitar and singing a sad ballad. The more he sang, the sadder he became. The more he sang, the lower his voice became. Jean Wan, who had been trying hard to calm down, was stirred up bit by bit. She couldn't help clenching the wine glass tighter and tighter. She had run out of the hotel to calm herself down. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would not be able to control her emotions. She really wanted to grab Mo Jingshan's collar and interrogate him. In her previous life, after their divorce, did he spend every day within Shuyan when he went to America? That 10 years of his life that she could not even touch. He was the powerful Shine Group's global CEO. Everything about him was impossible for her to know. The distance between them was so far, so far. And in those 10 years, who was it that walked so closely with him? Was it in Shuyan? Was it Ji Menggran? Or was it a woman thousands of times better than her? But she could not ask. If she did, she would only be treated as a lunatic. A lunatic who spoke nonsense that others could not understand. Shine Group's CEO Mo Jingshan has returned to the country today. He has already arrived in Haicheng. What are you looking at? Do you know who that person in the news is? A woman like you probably doesn't even have the qualifications to carry his shoes. The last few words she heard before she died in her previous life suddenly rang in her ears. GG. G Group's GG. Suddenly she felt like she was in an ice-cold prison. Everything around her was icy cold. That kind of helpless struggle and the feeling of suffocation from the poison were all surrounding her. It was so cold that her teeth were chattering. Not far away there were 2 men who were listening to music and drinking. They were dressed like elite white-collar workers of the upper class. They noticed the sound of a bottle falling to the ground in the corner. The 2 men looked back and saw a slender and fair woman hugging her knees and curling up on the sofa. Her face was buried in her knees, and her body was trembling imperceptibly, as if she was very cold. "Miss, are you all right?" The 2 men walked over, asking in concern. Jean Wan clenched her fists. She raised her eyes. The moment they saw her face, the 2 men were stunned. After a long while they said in surprise, "Miss Ji?" Although Jean Wan had drunk, she could recognize them. They seemed to have worked with the Ji family's company. It didn't matter who they were, she couldn't be bothered to think about it. She only glanced at them coldly before burying her face in her knees again. The 2 men saw that she seemed to have drunk too much. She was quiet and depressed. She did not look like the arrogant and domineering Mississippi. The 2 of them asked worriedly, "Miss Ji, did you drink too much? Do you need to contact someone from the Ji family to pick you up?" In the end, the 2 of them had yet to finish speaking when Jean Wan suddenly raised her head. She asked expressionlessly, "Do you want to drink?" The 2 of them. To be able to sit and drink with the Ji family's miss, it was truly a blessing of 3 lifetimes, all right? Who would refuse? Even if it was just drinking, this was definitely a huge temptation to men. Furthermore, they could take the opportunity to curry favor with the Ji family. Only a fool would refuse. Half an hour later. Jean Wan's eyes were no longer red. Her sad mood was also gone. She began to speak in all sorts of smiles. She clinked glasses with the 2 of them, and as she drank, she raised her hand and pointed at the people singing in the stands not far away. "Let me tell you, I've turned over a new leaf. If it was in the past, if I saw such a handsome and good singer in a bar, I would definitely go and tease him, also." She smiled and narrowed her eyes. She raised her finger and pointed in a circle. "Do you know who the boss behind this bar is? Let me tell you." As Jean Wan spoke, she raised her finger and placed it by her lips. Her eyes were hazy as she giggled. "The boss here is, I'm sorry, she can't drink anymore." The wine that was about to reach Jean Wan's lips was suddenly intercepted by a hand. Mo Jingshan's expression was as heavy as water. He pulled Jean Wan, who was sitting paralyzed on the sofa and giggling foolishly, into his arms. He did not look at the 2 people's awkward and bewildered expressions as they realized who he was. He half dragged, half carried her up. He even kicked the coffee table in the middle of the sofa away and directly brought Jean Wan away. Jin Wan, whose brain had been completely washed by alcohol, was completely unaware of what had happened. She even waved at the passing waiter, vainly trying to get another glass of wine to drink. "I still want to drink. You're already this drunk after just a few glasses. Do you think you'll ever have the chance to touch this in this lifetime?" Mo Jingshan's expression was heavy as he brought her out of the bar. His hand forcefully wiped Jin Wan's face, wiping away the wine stains on her lips. As he wiped, Jin Wan dodged, refusing to cooperate at all. "Be more obedient." His tone was low and filled with anger. At this moment, a white luxury car that had been quietly parked on the opposite side of the road started its engine and drove away. Mo Jingshan watched as the car left. His gaze instantly turned bone-chilling. He then glanced at Jin Wan, who was disobediently trying to struggle out of his hands. Chapter 104. She remembered that she was brought out by Sheng Yihan. She also remembered that she wanted to find a place to calm down. When she got out of the car nearby, she warned Sheng Yihan not to follow her. However, she did not expect him to find her so quickly. "Do you want to get in the car yourself, or do you want me to carry you in?" Mo Jingshan's cold voice carried a hint of sternness. However, he did not let go of her in case she ran away like a rabbit. There were cars passing by nearby. If they were not careful, they would be in danger. Jin Wan stood in the same spot without moving. Right now, not only did she not want to get in the car, she also wanted to take off her shoes and throw them at his face. Seeing that she was standing there like a statue, Mo Jingshan's hand directly wrapped around her waist. Jin Wan's gaze turned to him, pausing on the well-tailored and well-made long coat he was wearing. He only had a shirt inside. There was no suit. Oh, that's right. Previously he gave her the suit to wear. It seemed to have been thrown in the bathroom. It was worth a lot. Just the price of that suit alone was enough to buy a 200-square-meter house in the capital 10 years later. Right now, the coat he was wearing was even more expensive. She looked at the man's cold and handsome face and suddenly smiled. In the past 10 years that seemed like a dream, and in the recent days that they spent together, she had never thought about what kind of man she had married. How high was he that even Jin Wan was not worthy of him? How good was he to make her go from a firm goal in the beginning to a stage where she was gradually afraid of losing him? Jin Wan stared at him, using a voice slightly hoarse from the alcohol to ask, "Is the banquet over?" "Not yet." Since she asked, he answered, but his tone was slightly heavy. Jin Wan's heart ached. She lowered her head. "Then go back. I just want to come out to calm down. I don't want to hold you up." "Calm down? You jumped out the window and ran so far to drink just to calm down?" Mo Jingshan's hand around her waist was almost pressing her into his body. It was slightly heavy and it hurt slightly. Jin Wan furrowed her brows and pushed him. "We are on the street. There are cars passing by. Be careful. Go back to the banquet. I'll take a taxi back to Aolan International." As she spoke, she suddenly used force to push the man away. Jin Wan turned around and really reached out to hail a taxi. "Stop." The man's deep and cold voice rang out. Jin Wan acted as though she could not hear him. She ignored him, her hands still reaching forward. It was only when a taxi approached and was about to stop in front of her that her waist and wrist suddenly tightened. The world spun around her as Mo Jingshan pushed her into the car he had driven over by the roadside. It wasn't the business car he had taken to the King's Court Hotel tonight, but the black ghost that she was very familiar with. Her back bumped hard against the car door. Although it was not painful, Jin Wan instinctively put on a defensive look. Before she could speak, Mo Jingshan bent down and kissed her on the lips. There was only a faint taste of champagne in his mouth. It was mellow and pleasant, and his unique, cool aura caused Jin Wan's mind to feel as though a string that had been stretched taut suddenly snapped. She suddenly raised her hand to push him away, but he pressed both her arms against the car door. It was a very forceful press. His wrist was almost broken by him. She had never seen Mo Jingshan with such a temper. Jin Wan hadn't thought it through before. At this moment, she roughly understood why Mo Jingshan had never been affected by Ji Mingran's indirect attacks. It was probably because he had known many things about her and her past since a long time ago. So, was it because of Sheng Yihan? She had yet to do anything with him because of Shu Yan. What right did he have to have a temper? She did not know when this kiss would end. The cold wind blew past. Jin Wan was trapped between his chest and the car. Because of him, she could not feel the cold air. Finally, her legs began to weaken. Mo Jingshan placed a hand on her waist, supporting her weak body that was about to slip. Jin Wan's drunkenness had yet to dissipate. She was kissed until her vision was blurry and she could not speak. She could only hear the man's clear voice by her ear. I haven't even settled the debt with you and you've already given me a good show of jumping out of the window. Jinwan, you've grown up. Jinwan abruptly raised her head. The car door was abruptly opened, and her entire body was pushed inside. Her body fell onto the seat without any resistance. She scrambled to sit up, but he had already walked around the car and sat in the driver's seat. He locked the door and did not give her a chance to alight. Emo Jingshin. Can't anyone throw a temper? I came out to drink because I was in a bad mood. It's not like I fought or threw a tantrum. What right do you have to treat me so harshly? Jinwan turned around and shouted at him. Her breathing was hurried and her chest was heaving. She glared at him. Emo Jingshin was neither cold nor warm. You should be thankful that the one drinking with you earlier wasn't that illegitimate son of the Sheng family. Otherwise I'll let you know what it means to truly go overboard. He directly drove the car away. However, not long after, Jinwan felt a wave of nausea from drinking too much tonight. She raised her hand to her mouth as though she was about to vomit. Emo Jingshin stopped the car and finally unlocked the car. Jinwan rushed to push open the door and staggered out of the car. She squatted by the side of the road and retched. She had not eaten anything tonight. Apart from alcohol, there was nothing else she could vomit. Her throat was burning. Her heart was uncomfortable and her entire body was uncomfortable. Sensing the man's approach, Jinwan squatted by the side of the road and said weakly, If I take the car again tonight, I'll definitely vomit again. My stomach isn't feeling well. Go back to the banquet first. Don't worry about me. Before she could finish her words, the man abruptly lifted her up by the waist. The moment Jinwan's feet and body left the ground, her two hands instinctively grabbed his collar. Her half-drunk, half-awake eyes met Emo Jingshin's that were as deep as the sea. How can I not care about you? The man's voice was low and indifferent. There was a hint of helplessness in his tone toward her current state. When Emo Jingshin forcefully brought her into the nearest hotel, Jinwan was unable to resist, both physically and mentally. On one hand, she really did not want to take the car again. Her stomach was filled with alcohol, and her stomach was churning with the urge to vomit. On the other hand, when she came out, she did not bring her bag, money, or cell phone. If she was really left here, she would most likely only be able to sleep by the roadside. Even if she was drunk, she could still understand the logic of being under someone else's roof. Furthermore, under Emo Jingshin's diamond and gold-rimmed roof, there was no way she would court death. Chapter 105. Jinwan abruptly took a step back. Her expression was solemn as though saying, I want to keep my distance from you. Her entire body was like a porcupine as she attempted to retreat further. Emo Jingshin glanced at her. Why don't you try taking another step back? Jinwan did not speak. She turned around and leaned against the wall of the elevator. She was drunk, she would just drink. But now that she was drunk, she was like a punching bag. After exiting the elevator and entering the room, Jinwan directly slipped inside. She still insisted on keeping her distance from Emo Jingshin. Emo Jingshin raised his hand to press against his brows. He then looked at her expression. His black eyes stared at her as he unhurriedly unbuttoned his expensive and exquisite cufflinks. He softly and indifferently said, You're drunk. I won't bicker with you. Come here. Jinwan stood by the window warily. She leaned against the curtains as though only then could she feel some sense of security. I'm not drunk. She raised her voice to defend herself. I told you to come here. Emo Jingshin's heavy voice cut her off. Jinwan leaned against the curtains, her hands gripping the fabric tightly. Her gaze landed on her toes as she softly emphasized, I said I'm not drunk, so I'm not drunk. Emo Jingshin, you can't rely on my good temper to stop me from finding a quiet place to stay. Besides, your temper is good? Emo Jingshin smiled imperceptibly. Jinwan, wasn't her current temper good enough? You're not drunk? He coldly smiled again. Jinwan? She did not care. In any case, she was not drunk. All right. Since you're not drunk, let's have a good chat about tonight's matters. Emo Jingshin's low and cold voice approached. Jinwan watched as he approached and subconsciously leaned against the window behind her. If you take another step back, that window that isn't tightly closed will open. This is the 18th floor. Do you want to fall? He spat out each word without any warmth. Jinwan's heart skipped a beat. Earlier on, she felt a cold breeze on her back. She turned back to see that the window behind the curtains was indeed not tightly shut. There was still a gap and a little wind was leaking in from it. She was silent for a moment before reaching behind to pull the window inward. As she closed it completely, she suddenly felt the man's cool scent approaching. Jin Wan turned her face away, refusing to look at him. Seeing that she was clearly going to continue ignoring him, Mo Jingshan's perfect jaw tightened. In the next second, he grabbed her wrist and pressed it against the bay window behind her. Jin Wan sensed his pressure and abruptly looked up at him in shock. She took a step back and leaned against the glass behind her. However, just as she was about to struggle, the man's cell phone suddenly rang. The melodious ringtone rang one after another. She didn't need to guess to know that the banquet hadn't ended yet. She finally sobered up a little. She also clearly confirmed that what she wanted now was indeed more than before. If it was a month ago, when she had just woken up in the bridal room, she would not have cared about the words of those people today, including in Xuyen's existence. What she wanted was the identity of Mrs. Mo. What she wanted was to be able to protect everything she had lost and not repeat the same mistakes. What she wanted was to live a good life again. But earlier she really minded it. She minded it to the point where even she was shocked. Tonight she might really be a little emotional. When she came out, she did not even think twice and directly boarded Sheng Yihan's car. Usually, even if a knife was held to her neck, she might not have done it. Jin Wan rubbed her forehead, suddenly feeling a little regretful. She had really lived 2 lives in vain. As someone who had experienced almost everything, her mental fortitude was actually not strong enough. Chapter 106. The man stood by the door. Seeing that she was standing there unmoving, wrapped in a towel and bathrobe like a bloated snowman, his cold brows immediately furrowed. "Come here," he said mildly. His tone was indiscernible. Jin Wan remained standing there unmoving. She had thought that he had returned to the banquet, but it turned out that he had gone to buy food for her? "You had an accident in the bathroom last night. Your entire body is cold and unconscious. Right now you're standing by the window to enjoy the wind. Do you want to fall sick?" Mo Jingshan's voice was heavy. "Close the window and come here." Jin Wan was indeed slightly cold. Earlier, she had only thought that the wind would clear her mind. Seeing that Mo Jingshan's gaze had grown colder, she raised her hand to close the window. Walking over, she lowered her eyes to look at the takeout in his hands. Just by smelling it, she could tell that it was her favorite dishes. She raised her eyes to see that Mo Jingshan was glancing at the bathrobe she was wearing. He did not seem as cold as before. "You didn't return to the banquet?" Jin Wan cleared her throat, speaking unnaturally. "I thought..." Mo Jingshan reached out to touch her face. Jin Wan paused, raising her eyes to look at him. Her skin was ice cold. He did not speak, his cold brows furrowing. His warm palm rubbed her face until Jin Wan's expression was no longer as stiff and her face was no longer as cold. Only then did he place the takeout in his other hand on the table by the side. "And Xuyen alone has already angered you to this extent. If I were to return now, I'm afraid that you would even dare to jump from the 18th floor. Mo Jingshan's tone was cold. "Jin Wan? I'm not that desperate." Mo Jingshan glanced at her, raising her chin with his hand. His clear, cold eyes watched her. "You've sobered up?" "When I showered earlier, I sobered up quite a bit." Jin Wan tried to turn her face away, but he still held her chin, preventing her from looking away. She raised her eyes to meet his. The man's gaze was slightly dark. He stared at her for a long time. "What happened to Sheng Yihan?" Jin Wan lifted her eyelids, her tone slightly unconcerned. "I have nothing to do with him. He has always been Xia Tian's doctor. When I visited Xia Tian at the hospital, it was inevitable that we would cross paths." Seeing that Mo Jingshan was only watching her coldly, she could not help but furrow her brows and continue to explain. "He is about to return to the Sheng family. He invited me to attend the banquet. Originally, I did not know what kind of banquet it was and did not want to come. But in the end I was brought here. I was afraid that there was something strange, so I did not enter. But I saw you and Xuyen." As she spoke, Jin Wan glanced at him. Even if she didn't speak, her meaning was clear. What she meant was that she did not dress up as anyone's female companion, nor did she want to have too much to do with Sheng Yihan. But, bye. From? Otherwise there wouldn't be so many things happening tonight. And? Eat first. He placed his hand down and opened the takeout on the table. The exquisite, translucent box contained Jin Wan's favorite Chinese dishes and pastries. There was also a glass of hot fruit juice. Jin Wan was originally angry, but now that she had sobered up, she could not throw a tantrum. She sat down, picked up her chopsticks and took a bite. "How did you know I didn't eat?" she asked casually as she ate. Her eyes were fixed on the food in front of her and did not look at the man by her side. "Earlier when you vomited outside you could only vomit out wine. If I can't tell, how can I be your husband?" Mo Jingshan saw that she was still tactful. He saw that she knew not to make things difficult for her body and stomach. His tone softened and was no longer as cold. Jinwan's mouth was still full of food. She paused and suddenly used her chopsticks to poke at the rice. She mumbled, "So you still know whose husband you are?" Mo Jingshan's brows moved. He rubbed her head as though comforting her and chuckled softly. Hearing that he was actually laughing, Jinwan forced herself to swallow the food in her mouth. She raised her head and glared at him. "Mo Jingshan, even if I'm sober, it doesn't mean that my anger has dissipated. You can still laugh? So, are you feeling wronged?" He was still smiling, his finger already touching her angry brows. She was not wronged. She was angry. Mo Jingshan was the only legitimate successor of the Mo family. He was also the most favored successor. As long as he nodded his head, no one could stop him from obtaining everything. Furthermore, the Mo family's foundation had always been stable. There was no need for the Yin family's support. It was still a giant among the American Chinese businesses. Their position would not be shaken in the slightest. No matter how she thought about it, the relationship with the Yin family was just a mutually beneficial one. Everything was just Mo Jingshan's father's one-sided wish. However, those people made it sound as though Mo Jingshan not marrying in Shuyan was his loss. Which woman would not be angry after hearing this? To prevent this little woman from being filled with anger, Mo Jingshan sat by her side and placed the cup of hot fruit juice in front of her. His voice was clear and heavy as he patiently explained, "Do you still remember my promise to let Secretary and return to America in a week?" Jinwan choked for a moment. She rushed to take the juice and drank a mouthful before barely managing to calm down. Mo Jingshan's hand gently rubbed her back. As he helped to calm her down, he softly said, "The collaboration between the Mo Corporation and Shine Group was originally supposed to be completed in 2 weeks. However, I forcefully limited it to a week. Recently, I've been working overtime in the office, attending meetings and attending too many projects. This is also the reason." Jinwan was startled. "Because of me, you compressed the work that was supposed to be completed in 2 weeks into a week?" Mo Jingshan smiled. "My father did indeed plan on keeping in Shuyan in High City. However, I have a rough understanding of the Yin family and in Shuyan's situation. Tonight was a trap set up for them. Every step was within the plan. The goal was to successfully send in Shuyan back to America and not form a grudge with the Yin family because of this." Seeing that Jinwan's gaze was somewhat apologetic, he smiled mildly. "After all, the Mo family and the Yin family have been friends for many years. I can't let the two families' elders' faces become too ugly. That's why the scene you saw tonight happened." Jinwan finally realized that her jealousy tonight was a huge mistake. She awkwardly and apologetically said, "Tonight I actually didn't see anything." What she saw was in Shuyan appearing together with Mo Jingshan as his female companion. Regardless of what the others said or did, Mo Jingshan and Shu Zhu did not act too intimately. Chapter 107. Jinwan pursed her lips. "Then why didn't you tell me beforehand?" Mo Jingshan glanced at her meaningfully, his hand lifting her chin. His brows were low and deep as he chuckled. "Before everything ends, I didn't want you to feel any psychological pressure." Jinwan's heart instantly melted like the first snow in the winter. If she had known that Mo Jingshan had been so busy these past few days only because he had promised to do all of this within a week, she would indeed feel some psychological pressure. She would also ask herself if she was being too unreasonable. "I'm sorry." Jinwan's biggest mistake was neglecting to trust him. She felt very apologetic in her heart. "Actually, regarding Secretary Anne's matter, I don't really mind. I know that you don't have any feelings for her, and you're very magnanimous." Mo Jingshan seemed to have seen through her thoughts. He said with interest, "Jumping out of the window, climbing a tree, and drinking to drown your sorrows, I'm afraid there isn't a woman more magnanimous than you in this world." Before Jinwan could feel ashamed, the man's hand had already hooked a strand of her slightly damp hair on her shoulder, asking softly, "Are you full?" Jinwan was really in the wrong today. She quietly nodded, allowing his hand to gently stroke her shoulder. His posture was leisurely and careless. His slender fingers casually curled up a strand of her hair. "Now it's my turn to eat." "Then you eat." "I didn't eat much." Jinwan raised her hand to tidy up the lunchbox on the table. She took out a new set of cutlery and pushed it in front of him. However, the man chuckled softly. Without even glancing at the food on the table, he pressed her against the side of the table and slowly kissed down her neck. Jinwan's body was filled with the fragrance of shower gel. Her body was wrapped in a towel and bathrobe. It was so tight that he wished he could tear it apart. It was tempting to crush her into his stomach. Jinwan's entire body softened from his kiss. She almost drowned in his embrace. When Mo Jingshan's kiss landed on her lips, Jinwan was shocked to find that Mo Jingshan's kiss was becoming deeper and more seductive. He kissed the corner of her mouth, then her burning cheeks, and then bit her earlobe. His breath fell on her earlobe. "I've been working overtime these days and haven't had enough sleep. How are you going to make it up to me?" Jinwan leaned against his shoulder, feeling the heat of his body. As the sensitive spot by her ear was stimulated again and again, she softened in his arms. "What do you want?" She leaned on his shoulder, tilted her head slightly, and gazed at him with her watery eyes. "If you're really tired, how about I give you a massage before going to bed?" She thought it was a good idea, so she raised her hand and waved it in front of his eyes. "Do you want a massage?" The room was very quiet. The moonlight outside the window and the neon lights of the city were blocked by the curtains. Mo Jingshan held her raised hand, bringing it to his lips to kiss it. "You're helping me bathe?" He raised his eyebrows and chuckled. Jinwan nodded without hesitation. "All right." "Wash your entire body," he emphasized. "All right." Jinwan nodded again. The expression on her face could not be any more natural. It was rare for her to be so cooperative. Mo Jingshan's elegant brows moved. He smiled and stood up to head to the bathroom. Jinwan followed him in and turned on the bathroom lights. After thinking for a moment, she asked, "At this time, the dinner party, don't you need to go?" Mo Jingshan removed his coat, unhurriedly unbuttoning his shirt. "One button, 2 buttons, 3 buttons. Everything that requires me to appear personally is more or less done. As for the follow-up of the project, Shinmu and the vice president of the company will be there. Even if I stay there, I'll only be there to calm my father down." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. "But if you don't stay there, will Director Mo?" Jinwan paused. She did not plan on mentioning the incident in the bathroom tonight. She and Mo Jingshan had a tacit understanding of the instigator of that incident. She was very clear that with Mo Jingshan around, aside from Mo Xiaoza, no one else would dare to give such an order. Mo Jingshan unbuttoned another button. His voice was much lower and colder. "Initially, I did plan to leave him some face. But now there's no need." As soon as he finished speaking, the man turned around. Beneath his completely unbuttoned shirt was a chest that could make a woman's mouth go dry instantly. The lines of the man's body were perfect, and every part of him was indescribably seductive. These 2 words should not be used to describe a man, but it was not an exaggeration to use them on Mo Jingshan. Jinwan's gaze trembled from the visual impact. She recalled what she had promised earlier and took the initiative to help him remove his shirt. 2 minutes later, Mo Jingshan's light lips curved slightly. He watched the little woman whose hand had paused on his belt. "Continue." Jinwan, when Mo Jingshan said to take a bath, he would really take a bath. Jinwan thought that she would be eaten up and wiped clean by him in the bathtub. In the end, when she began to scrub the great CEO Mo's body from top to bottom, he remained as still as a mountain. He only glanced at her meaningfully from time to time but did not do anything. After working overtime for several days straight, he was most likely really tired. Jinwan did not want to waste any more of his rest time. She took the initiative to help him dry his body and was about to leave. However, Mo Jingshan suddenly held onto her waist and pulled her into his embrace. Following that, Jinwan heard his voice that had been suppressed for a long time. "You still want to leave?" Jinwan's arm pressed against his already dried chest. She glanced back. "If I don't leave, what else can I do? It's already so late. Furthermore, you seem very tired." Without waiting for her to finish speaking, the man pressed her heavily into his embrace. His kiss landed on her neck and he gently bit down on the skin on the back of her neck. It was no wonder the ancients would always reveal the neck when beheading someone. The back of a human's neck was naturally weak and sensitive. Jinwan felt as though he had bitten down on her nerve center. The sensitive signal immediately exploded in her consciousness and traveled down her body. Half of her body was already numb. Mo Jingshan tightened his grip. "Originally, seeing that your body wasn't feeling too well today and that you suffered in the bathroom, I was considering letting you off. However, you even brought out the ability to jump out of the window. That's fine. According to what you're saying, your man only worked overtime for a few days, yet his strength to make love is affected? That's not what I meant. What I meant was... Her sophistry had yet to leave her mouth when she was carried up by him. Mo Jingshan directly pressed her against the bathroom wall. Jinwan was squeezed between the wall and him. Both her legs were forced to wrap around his waist. She had helped him shower earlier, and the towel and bathrobe on her body were mostly wet. He reached out to undo the cumbersome things on her body. Since they were all wet and heavy, there was no need to wear them anymore. Chapter 108. However, no matter how she tried to hide or how she begged for mercy, Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting her off easily tonight. His body pressed tightly against hers. Remembering that Jinwan was wearing the gown Sheng Yihan had prepared for her today, he narrowed his eyes and abruptly flipped her around. Jinwan's back was facing him. Feeling his kiss land on the sensitive part of her neck again, she couldn't help but twist her body. The man behind her let out a muffled groan and began to deliberately bite the back of her neck. Sometimes it was light, sometimes it was heavy, but it was as if he wanted to kill her. Furthermore, at the moment when Jinwan was about to cry, he did not hesitate to barge in from behind. Jinwan directly cried out. As she trembled uncontrollably, he leaned down by her ear. You and the Sheng family's man don't ever see each other again, en? See, no, he's also a doctor. Ah. Jinwan was so agitated that she could not complete her sentence. What? When Mo Jingshan heard her first word, his actions became harsher. Jinwan was bullied to the point where she could not think. She rushed to say, don't see, never again? I never planned on having anything to do with him. Mo Jingshan no longer planned on letting her off. No matter how she tried to explain or act coquettishly, he did not let up. The curtains in the room were half opened. Light shone in from the back. The man's upper body was bare, and his figure was smooth. This was the scene that Jinwan saw when she opened her eyes. After a night of entanglement, she was tired and weak. She did not want to move at all. Even though the sun was already high in the sky, she did not bring her phone with her. Mo Jingshan's phone could no longer be used. It was rare for them to have such a quiet and undisturbed space. She did not want to ruin it. But last night, she felt that because of her jealousy and her minding, other than dissatisfaction, he seemed especially pleased with himself? At first she did not notice it. Later on, when she was forcefully pressed onto the bed and her head was about to hit the headboard, she finally heard a hint of delight in his words. In the past she always wanted a divorce. Later on she suddenly changed. Step by step they became successful. However, she remained calm and did not do anything extreme. Last night, he was extremely pleased, right? Because she was really jealous. Jinwan used her eyes to describe the handsome face of the man beside her when he was asleep. When he was asleep, Mo Jingshan's handsome, quiet and aloof demeanor gave off a sense of approachability. Especially the coldness between his brows that could freeze one's heart and make one tremble at any time. Right now, it was completely gone. Like some kind of expensive and aloof feline, there was actually a little bit of softness in its sleep, making people want to get close to it. Jinwan gently turned over in his arms and looked at him from the front. Seeing that his eyes were still closed, she blinked and raised her hand to trace the man's elegant and deep profile. Mo Jingshan's handsome face was against the light coming in from the window. In the darkness of the light, it appeared warm and dark. Jinwan's fingers carefully and gently caressed his handsome brows, then his closed eyes and finally his high nose bridge. Her fingers gradually landed on his lips. On the man's pale lips, there was a small bite mark from last night. It was very small and could only be seen from such a close distance. This could not be blamed on her. Who asked him to be so fierce last night? Even if she cried and begged for mercy, it would not work. She was so angry that she could only bite him. Not only did she bite him, but Jinwan's gaze also shifted to his back. Last night, she had even scratched his back harshly several times. Have you seen enough? All of a sudden, the man's low and mild voice rang by her fingers. Jinwan jumped in fright and abruptly retracted her fingers. Mo Jingshan only spoke hoarsely. Without opening his eyes, he reached out and pulled the similarly naked Jinwan into his embrace. His arms tightened around her waist. What time is it now? He hugged her. His voice was slightly sleepy and hoarse. It was indolent and overly sexy. Jinwan glanced out the window. I don't know. From the color of the sky, it should be past 6. His palm pressed against her back, gently patting it. You only ate so little last night. Are you hungry? Jinwan wanted to say that she had expended so much energy last night. Right now she was indeed awakened by hunger. However, being hugged by him like this, she would rather starve than get up. No, I'm still sleepy. She buried her head in his embrace, speaking softly and coquettishly. The man's light chuckle came from above her head. It was very light. His hand caressed the back of her head. Then continue sleeping. This time Jinwan did not sleep well. Perhaps it was because Mo Jingshan did not continue sleeping. She was the only one on the bed. Less than an hour later she woke up again. The moment she sat up, she saw Mo Jingshan dressed in a dark brown bathrobe. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling bay window, slender and silent. She was about to lift the blankets and get off the bed when she recalled that her clothes from yesterday were all wet in the bathroom. They had also been pulled onto the floor by him. Right now they were most likely all bunched up and could not be worn again. Her gaze shifted and saw Mo Jingshan's clothes on the sofa not far from the bed. She quietly reached over, picked up a shirt and put it on. Then she tiptoed barefoot to the bathroom. Mo Jingshan sensed her movements. He turned around and saw that the little woman was wearing his shirt. Her entire leg was exposed. It was as white and smooth as porcelain. From time to time he would be able to see the scenery under the shirt with a single step. Jinwan did not notice that he had already discovered that she was awake. She softly entered the bathroom and quietly closed the door. She picked up the clothes on the floor and placed them on the glass countertop by the side. She then reached out to wash her face. The effects of last night's alcohol had completely dissipated. Jinwan thought about what happened at the banquet last night as she picked up the facial cleanser provided by the hotel and rubbed it in her hands. The bathroom door was made of a translucent frosted material. A black shadow approached from the door. Jinwan's movements faltered. She raised her head to see that the door had opened. Mo Jingshan's dark eyes were slightly lowered as he looked at her. His expression was calm and unhurried, but he blocked the bathroom door completely. The bathroom in this hotel was not as big as the one at home. The door also appeared much smaller compared to his height. Although the door was clearly blocked, Jinwan strangely felt that between his brows, there was a lingering emotion from last night's events. Especially his usually cool and indifferent gaze. At this moment, it was as though there was a fire that was about to burn the shirt on her body. Jinwan paused and subconsciously tightened her legs. You want to use the bathroom? I'll go out after washing my face. As she spoke, she raised the foam in her hands. It'll be done in a moment. Mo Jingshan watched her, slowly and hoarsely making an end sound. He took 2 steps in. Chapter 109. Mo Jingshan dragged her over, pressing her against the glass countertop. He lowered his head to kiss her, gently nibbling and sucking on her lips. His sudden kiss caused Jinwan's legs to soften. She almost lost her balance. Her entire body was enveloped by his scent. The man's scent was cold and persistent, possessing his unique warmth. She was wearing his shirt, which barely covered her thighs. He only had to lift his eyes slightly to see her tightly pressed legs through the full-length mirror in the bathroom behind her. Mo Jingshan held her even tighter, pressing her against his body as he kissed her even more deeply. The bathroom was small and the temperature climbed. Steam rose and the sound of water splashing could be heard from the tap. He pressed the back of her head with one hand and held onto her slender waist with the other, bringing her forward. Jinwan was unable to defend herself and could only lean heavily against his embrace. Jinwan's hands were still wet with the foam from the facial cleanser. She did not dare to push him away. Her body did not have any support, and the sound of water was by her ears, causing her mind to be in chaos. She suddenly wanted to reach over to turn off the tap. However, the moment she moved, Mo Jingshan mercilessly bit down on the tip of her tongue. Jinwan instinctively struggled slightly. She was kissed and dodged to the side, softly crying out. He chuckled mischievously, speaking softly by her ears. Why are you hiding? Dressed like this, what do you want to do? Jinwan softly panted as she dodged. Last night when I helped you shower, my clothes were all wet. If I don't wear yours, don't tell me I can. Mo Jingshan smiled. His eyes were dark and deep, extremely alluring. There's no one else here and the air conditioner is warm enough. You can choose not to wear it. Jinwan directly glared at him. I'm not an exhibitionist. Besides, I just wanted to wash my face. I didn't want to do anything. He purposely moved his hand under her shirt. Jinwan's entire body trembled from the invasion of his fingers. She only heard the man's teasing voice by her ears. You didn't want to do anything? Then what's going on here? Jinwan's entire body suddenly stiffened. Her face was flushed red. She lowered her head and buried it in his neck. She softly whimpered, her body trembling slightly. Mo Jingshan pushed her up again and again. When she could no longer hold on, he pressed her down harshly. After tossing and turning in the bathroom for a while, he chuckled hoarsely. Shall we go out? Jinwan? Put me down first. Mo Jingshan smiled and didn't let go of her. He carried her out. She buried her head in his neck, and her toes curled up because of the place where they were connected. As soon as he put her on the bed, she was pinned under his body. Looking at her long hair spread out, he pulled a strand of it to his lips and kissed it. Jinwan panted softly and could not help but laugh. She raised her hand to pull her hair back, grumbling, "It's so early in the morning and you're already like this. Do you really have to take half my life?" He casually pinched her hair and slid it down her collarbone. When Jinwan couldn't stand the teasing and trembled, he snorted at her reaction and chuckled softly against her ear. "I've been so busy these days that I can only go home after midnight. My woman sleeps by my side and I can only hug her but can't eat her. Can't you let me get back some interest?" "You can wake me up," he smiled. "I can't bear to." "Then you can bear to do it now?" "I woke up hungry in the morning. You're still squeezing me like this." Mo Jingshan made an N sound. "Very tired? Then I'll slow down." "Jinwan, slow down?" He was clearly using a different method to slowly and patiently torment her. Jinwan was tormented by his suddenly slowing movements. Her entire body felt numb and she suddenly raised her body cooperatively. Mo Jingshan raised his brows, abruptly retreating along with her movements. The more she took the initiative to approach, the more he retreated. After going back and forth several times, Jinwan was angered by him. She reached out to push him hard. "Bastard. You're doing this on purpose." Seeing that her charming expression was mixed with anger, Mo Jingshan's lips curved. Abruptly, he sent himself in deeply and heavily. Jinwan had wanted to push him away, but in the blink of an eye, this action caused her to moan. She could no longer say a word as she glared at him. After a long while, she finally managed to catch her breath. She weakly and hoarsely complained, "I've really been tricked by your appearance. You're really a beast." Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. "You're dressed like this in front of me. If I'm not moved, then I'm worse than a beast." Jinwan? She was actually speechless. 2 hours later, Jinwan was finally able to climb up from the bed to eat. Mo Jingshan was still considerate enough to push the dining cart the hotel staff had brought into her bedside, saving her from the pain of getting off the bed. After all, right now her legs were really weak. "In the future, no matter what happens, remember to ask me first. Don't let your imagination run wild and be unhappy, remember?" Mo Jingshan handed the cutlery to her. His gaze was stern as though the ruffian from this morning was not him at all. Jinwan bit on the fragrant and delicious enoki mushroom, raising her eyes to say, "Yesterday I didn't understand the situation clearly. It's my fault, but you should at least remind me. Otherwise, if it was any other woman, they would not be able to accept it." Mo Jingshan raised his brows. "You still have the energy to discuss right and wrong with me?" "Jinwan, I don't." He snorted but did not tease her further. He allowed her to eat in peace. Only when Jinwan was full did Mo Jingshan's unhurried and calm voice ring out. "Do you remember what you promised me last night?" "And? What did I promise?" Jinwan could not remember what she had promised. She raised her eyes in surprise. Mo Jingshan's gaze darkened. His gaze was cold. "You promised not to see Shingy Han again. Are you selectively amnesiac?" She was quiet for a moment before directly asking, "Do you know a lot about me? For example, before we got married or even a few years earlier?" Mo Jingshan did not answer. His gaze toward her was unfathomable and unfathomable. After a moment, he raised his hand to pinch her cheek. "You have to keep your promises, N?" "I can do that, but you haven't answered me. Do you really know a lot about my past?" "But in my impression before we got married, I didn't have much interaction with the Mo family or you. Previously, when Ji Minggran mentioned Shingy Han, you automatically ignored it. Later on you didn't even mention it. But from last night until now, you clearly don't know anything about my past." Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her lips. His warm fingers caressed her lips as he unhurriedly said, "That's not important. You just have to remember you're Mrs. Mo." Jinwan's heart shrank from the warmth on her lips. "What kind of answer is that?" Chapter 110. Jinwan was slightly stunned. In the next second he had already kissed her. Why are you kissing whenever you want to? Just kissing. Mo Jingshan's words carried a hint of teasing. Was he going to do it again? Could it be that feeding her earlier was just to save up energy? After a kiss he finally released her. He placed his palm behind her head, pressing against her forehead as he watched her. Mrs. Mo once said, "No one can have any ideas about your man." He lowered his head to admire the moisture in her eyes, watching with satisfaction as she was kissed into a daze. On the other hand, if anyone dares to have any ideas about Mrs. Mo, I definitely won't be polite. Mo Jingshan actually had such a domineering side, yet it did not appear to be intentional. Furthermore, this man's domineering side did not make her unhappy. Instead, it made her instinctively want to express her stance. In the past, her relationship with Sheng Yihan had always been a one-sided problem. It had nothing to do with her. Jinwan stared at him and suddenly took the initiative to hug his shoulders. She raised her head and kissed him harshly on the lips. Under the man's dark and turbulent gaze, she sincerely said, "All right." This one word was so sincere that it was as though she wanted to hand over the little world hidden in her heart to his hands. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes, pressing her down on the bed. Jinwan fell back, looking at the man on top of her. In front of others, this clear and gentle man was the unapproachable CEO Mo. But at this moment he was seductive like a fiery and bewitching demon. There was no one else like him. On the other side, even after the banquet ended, and Xu Yan did not see Mo Jingshan return. Everyone in Haicheng knew that Mo Jingshan was a cold and rational person. Yet, this man who was never affected by his emotions actually made an exception for Jinwan. Early in the morning, and Xu Yan met Mo Xiaoza at the staircase of Wang Ting Hotel. "Uncle Mo," and Xu Yan politely nodded at him. Mo Xiaoza glanced at her, asking sternly, "Your complexion is so bad. You didn't sleep last night?" And Xu Yan smiled slightly. "I slept. Perhaps I slept too late. My complexion doesn't look good." "Everything you've seen and heard in the country these days, is it the same as last night? Jingshan is serious about that Jinwan?" Mo Xiaoza's expression was dark. And Xu Yan hesitated for a moment and did not speak. Instead, she slowly nodded her head. Mo Xiaoza first raised his eyebrows in extreme dissatisfaction, then narrowed his eyes coldly. After a moment, Mo Xiaoza said slowly, "Since that's the case, do you still want Mrs. Mo's identity?" And Xu Yan was silent for a long time. She took 2 deep breaths, her gaze filled with stubbornness. "Uncle Mo, what you should be asking me is, do I still want this man Mo Jingshan?" Without waiting for Mo Xiaoza to speak, her voice was soft but firm. "My answer is, I want it." Mo Xiaoza looked at her sternly for a long time before finally waving his hand at her. "All right, I understand. Go back and rest." And Xu Yan nodded at him respectfully. "Thank you, Uncle Mo." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around. When Shinmu brought her phone over, Jinwan was drying her hair in the bathroom. The sound of the wind was too loud. She only knew that Shinmu had brought her bag and Mo Jingshan's things over. When she walked out after drying her hair, Shinmu was respectfully and softly speaking to Mo Jingshan outside the door. "All right, CEO Mo, I understand." Mo Jingshan indicated that he could leave. Shinmu nodded and turned to smile politely at Jinwan before turning to leave. "Neither of us brought our phones. How did Shinmu know we were here?" Jinwan glanced at the back view of him walking toward the elevator. She casually asked as he closed the door. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her, using his chin to point at the phone in the room. She took her bag and searched for the clothes she wore in the car yesterday, but only the clothes inside. Her coat was still left in Sheng Yihan's car. Jinwan finally realized what was going on. She took her bag and searched for the clothes she wore in the car yesterday. She hesitated for a moment and did not dare to mention Sheng Yihan's name. After changing her clothes, she found that her phone had been out of battery since last night. She took out the charger from her bag and placed the phone on the bedside table. However, the moment she charged the phone and turned it on, she heard the sound of several text messages. The first one that popped up on the screen was from an unfamiliar number. "Rest well." It was a very ordinary word, but it was so concise that there was not even a punctuation mark. Jinwan stared at the 4 words, her fingers pausing on the screen. After a long moment of confusion, she finally guessed who it was. She opened the phone's photo album and found the record of Xia Tian's diagnosis. There was a page with Xia Tian's attending doctor's phone number. It was indeed Sheng Yihan. All these years, she and Sheng Yihan had tacitly ignored each other. Even when they passed each other in the hospital, it was as though they were strangers. He was his orthopedic doctor and she was her Mrs. Mo. They had long had nothing to do with each other, but now, he suddenly appeared in her sight with ulterior motives. What was the reason? Was it because he was about to officially return to the Sheng family? Was it because one of the 4 large families in Haicheng would belong to him? Was he really, as she had once seen him, hiding a monstrous ambition under his handsome appearance? Mo Jingshan had just made a call to the company. When he turned his gaze back from the window, he saw her thoughtful expression and asked, "What's wrong?" Jean Wan raised her head, her gaze pausing on the man's overly gentle and perfect face. Her expression remained calm, but her fingers quickly moved to delete the message that should not have appeared. Nothing. Mo Jingshan looked at the woman by the bed, narrowing his eyes. The little girl's fingers quickly tapped on the screen of her phone. He only glanced at her indifferently before he strode over and took her phone from her. Jean Wan wanted to reach out to snatch it back but retracted her hand due to the man's indifferent expression. That message had already been deleted. Mo Jingshan was currently looking at the top unread message. It was from Xia Tian. 3 consecutive messages. Mine Wan. My little heart has been shocked. I've already been unable to sleep for several days. That Dr. Sheng is simply too handsome. After interacting with him for so many days in the hospital, I actually didn't realize how good his looks are. Are you really familiar with Dr. Sheng? Does he have unidirectional autism? Otherwise, why is he usually so cold? He doesn't even say a word of superfluous nonsense. With just a glance he can freeze a person half to death. On account of that face of his, I'll forgive this iceberg. I still can't sleep. Also, this Dr. Sheng's facial features are extremely well proportioned. The bridge of his nose is very straight. Isn't it said that a man's nose is directly proportional to his lower body? This iceberg may appear refined in his white coat, but it completely cannot conceal his powerful nature. Sob, my heart is moved, I really want to sleep with him. Wan, since you've known him before, have you never had feelings for Dr. Sheng before? Seeing Mo Jingshan's unperturbed expression, the surrounding temperature clearly dropped several degrees. Jean Wan held her forehead. Chapter 111. Just from these few messages she felt that her life was about to end soon. Best friends always spoke without restraint. In their messages they dared to say all sorts of dirty jokes. This was practically stabbing a knife into Mo Jingshan's eyes. Then she saw Mo Jingshan's gaze. It was as though there were knives shooting toward her. His gaze was cold and filled with coldness. Cold rain, autumn frost, snow on the summit of a mountain, and many other words were unable to describe his piercingly cold expression. Cough. Jean Wan raised her hand guiltily to push the loose strands of hair behind her ear, calmly explaining, This is how we women chat in private. We don't care if it's meat or vegetables." Mo Jingshan glanced at her heavily. He still did not return the phone to her. His sharp gaze scraped her from top to bottom. "The way you talk without restraint is to study a man's nose?" Jean Wan, although she was not thinking of such a thing, her gaze unconsciously drifted toward Mo Jingshan's nose. She vaguely remembered that when they first got married, because she always resisted this marriage, Xia Tian had earnestly and patiently nagged about how this man Mo Jingshan was and whatnot. She also seemed to have said that Mo Jingshan's nose was tall and straight. Although he looked like an ascetic male god, his size was definitely not small. In any case, she had evaluated Mo Jingshan from all aspects and did not forget to be infatuated with him for several days. She said that it was a waste for Jean Wan to not sleep with a man like this. Her gaze suddenly met Mo Jingshan's. Jean Wan abruptly returned to herself and immediately reached out to snatch the phone back. The private conversations between women have always been nondescript. We talk about whatever comes to our minds. Only you men are allowed to admire a woman's black stockings, beautiful legs and high heels in the summer, but we women are not allowed to occasionally talk about such topics? Jean Wan tried to defend herself as she tried to snatch the phone back. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her. He raised his hand slightly and brushed the phone away from her hand, not letting her have her way. "When have you ever seen me pay attention to a woman's body below her shoulders?" His tone was unkind. Jean Wan rolled her eyes. "Every day you toss and turn me. Don't talk about below the shoulders, even below the waist has been seen by you, all right?" Not to mention looking around, he had kissed her from top to bottom, inside and out. Mo Jingshan chuckled coldly at her unreasonableness. "Apart from you, I don't care. In any case, return my phone to me first." Jean Wan could not win against him. She jumped onto the bed barefooted and pounced over to snatch it back. Seeing her pounce on him, Mo Jingshan didn't dodge or raise his hand. When she finally touched the phone, he pressed his arm against her waist and pressed her whole body into his arms. Jinwan was caught off guard and fell forward. She stumbled so hard that half of her body fell toward him, and her entire face was pressed against the man's chin. She was about to step back with the phone in her hand when the strong arm behind her waist tightened. The man's low voice rang by her ear. For the sake of the private conversation between you women, Mrs. Mo is even willing to throw herself into your arms. You were clearly the one who suddenly pressed down on my waist. Jinwan raised her head to explain. The moment she raised her head, her lips brushed past his. She had yet to react when the man held the back of her head and kissed her. She could not stand steadily on the bed. Half of her body was pressed against his. She twisted her waist and held the phone tightly in her hand. This position, she could not tell if it was ambiguous or awkward. In any case, this kiss was not ambiguous at all. Instead, it was more like a punishment. It was so heavy that it robbed her of all her breath. Only when Jinwan's tongue was numb from the kiss did the man release her. His gaze no longer had any warmth as it landed on her phone. Before the sky turns dark, arrange for her to be transferred to another orthopedic hospital. This was the undeniable sentence Mo Jingshan said by Jinwan's lips just as she was about to suffocate from the kiss. Transfer? She looked at him. 2 days ago, I did have this intention, but Xia Tian's legs can't move. If she gets hurt during the transfer, you're worried about the person I sent? Mo Jingshan lowered his head, indifferently glancing at her. His goal was to keep her away from Xing Yihan, while her goal was to keep Xia Tian away from that scumbag. Regardless of the reason, it was a good thing for Xia Tian to leave her current hospital. It could be considered as settling the matter once and for all. All right then. Which hospital should she be transferred to? I'll arrange it. Jinwan responded and glanced at him from time to time. He clearly minded those few messages earlier. He minded it a lot. If he had seen Xing Yihan's message, it was likely that it would not be as simple as transferring Xia Tian's hospital. Jinwan was thankful that her hands were fast enough to delete that message. At the same time, she was cursing that bastard Xia Tian in her heart. She really caused so much trouble. It was fine if she liked to chat dirty jokes with her. She could talk about which muscular male celebrity on the television or which male model with hormones bursting out of control. But she actually talked about Xing Yihan. She had seen people dig holes for their bosom friends, but she had never seen someone dig holes like this. Xia Tian, that idiot. Jinwan lowered her head. She replied to Xia Tian's message while informing her of the transfer and celebrating that she could finally break free from the iceberg. She then ignored Xia Tian's cries of pain and raised her eyes to look at Mo Jingshan. That's right. She took the initiative to change the topic. At the hospital, there's a bank owner chasing after Xia Tian. But he's a scumbag from head to toe. Can you do me a favor and prevent that man from getting close to Xia Tian again? It's best if he's thrown to Africa and never to return. Mo Jingshan glanced at the woman who looked like she wanted to forget about the earlier incident. He calmly asked, "What bank?" "I think it's a private bank in Haicheng. It has financial dealings with banks in Hong Kong and Taiwan." Mo Jingshan's tone was heavy. "It's just a small to medium-sized financial company. If they want to send someone to Africa legally, they can just buy it." Jinwan pursed her lips. "Buy it?" The Mo Corporation's business range is very wide. Many of the private banks and financial companies in Haicheng have dealings with the Mo Corporation. It's just a small bank. Do you still want to waste your time fighting with him? That was right. Fighting with that kind of scumbag was indeed a waste of time. Buying their bank shares was not only the most direct method, but it was also killing two birds with one stone. After all, the financial industry was also becoming more and more profitable. Obtaining a relationship with a bank was also a kind of gain. Buying it would not be a loss. Jinwan suddenly smiled. She held onto his arm and took the initiative to act spoiled. "Thank you, hubby. Hubby is the best. Hubby is the best." Chapter 112. Jinwan reached out to tug on his sleeves. As she tugged, she blinked at him with incomparable sincerity. "I've really never had any feelings for Xing Yihan. You should know that before I married into the Mo family, I've never had any official boyfriends, nor do I have any so-called past. I'm practically the model of a clean body and mind." Hearing the word model, Mo Jingshan mildly glanced at her. It was clear that he had gained a rare bit of patience from her sincere explanation. Jinwan took the opportunity to hug his arm. Before you, I've never loved any man. A trace of a smile appeared on Mo Jingshin's face. He reached out to smooth her hair, asking meaningfully, "Is Mrs. Mo confessing to me? You love me?" Jin Wan's heart stirred for a moment. Between her and Mo Jingshin, there had been all sorts of sweetness and warmth, but the word love had never been mentioned. She had yet to reply when she saw the man's lips curve slightly deeper. It seemed like his mood had suddenly improved. His mood was indeed not bad. Jin Wan's heart was currently in complete turmoil. The question that she had never dared to think about had suddenly leaped out in front of her unintentionally. By the time Jin Wan returned to herself, Mo Jingshin's hand had already tangled in her hair. He was watching her with a slight smile. "Aren't you going to continue charging your phone?" Jin Wan finally recalled that her phone had only been charged for less than 2 minutes before being unplugged. She rushed to continue charging. When she turned back, she saw that Mo Jingshin had picked up the remote control by the bedside and raised the temperature of the air conditioning by 2 degrees. The man's back view was tall and steady. No matter what time it was, he would always be unhurried and calm. Jin Wan suddenly chuckled lightly. Mo Jingshin turned to glance at her. "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing much. It's just that I suddenly realized that the great CEO Mo is like a professional nanny in front of me. No matter if it's hot or cold, he can take care of me meticulously. I should actually be moved to tears. I shouldn't be laughing at all. I admit my mistake." As she spoke, she could not help but laugh out loud. Her eyes curved into crescents as she laughed. Mo Jingshin casually tossed the remote control onto the bed, calmly saying, "It won't be too late to laugh when you learn how to take care of yourself." Jin Wan slept again in the afternoon. After all, she had used up all her energy last night and this morning. He only woke up when the sky turned dark. When he woke up, he saw Mo Jingshin sitting on the sofa. In his hands were the company documents that Shinmu had sent over in the afternoon, as well as some files that he needed to look through personally. The sofa in this hotel room was very soft. Mo Jingshin's sitting posture was elegant and proper. This man's beauty seemed to be innate. Even if he was just sitting there quietly looking at the company documents, he would still attract everyone's attention. Jin Wan got off the bed. She had just walked over when Mo Jingshin raised his head to look at her. His clear and heavy expression met her sleepy appearance. "You're not going to sleep?" he asked. "It's getting dark. Sleep after 10 o'clock. Otherwise your schedule will be messed up." Jin Wan saw the logo of Shine Group printed on the document in his hand. Knowing that it was a cooperation project with Shine Group, she didn't want to disturb him. Jin Wan turned to pour him a glass of water. "Come here," Mo Jingshin called. Hearing this, Jin Wan approached the sofa. Mo Jingshin patted the seat beside him, indicating for her to sit down. Jin Wan glanced at the water dispenser and gave up on the idea of pouring him a glass of water. She obediently sat down. The man's arms circled around her waist, naturally and intimately holding her in his embrace. His gaze remained focused on the documents in his hands. "Since Shine's project hasn't ended, why didn't you return to the company today? You've wasted the entire day in the hotel with me." "I'm already feeling bad," Jin Wan took the opportunity to ask as he placed the documents in his hands down. Mo Jingshin mildly curved his lips. He raised his hand to press against his brows. After resting for a few seconds, he picked up the documents again and continued reading. At the same time, his hand around her waist moved up, running through her soft hair. His gaze was on the documents, but his voice was directed at her. "There are just some follow-up matters that require my signature. I've worked overtime for almost a week, so I'll spend more time with you these 2 days." As he spoke, he lowered his head to look at her. "Not just today. My time tomorrow belongs to you as well." From last night until today, the two of them had stayed in this hotel room. Their food and necessities had all been sent up by the hotel staff. Although it was rare for the two of them to have such a pure, undisturbed world, why did Jin Wan feel that Mo Jingshin was implying that tomorrow, the two of them might have to spend the entire day in bed? When the hotel's dinner arrived, Jin Wan nibbled on the pork ribs while thinking about how she could enjoy such a warm and peaceful vacation time with Mo Jingshin while perfectly avoiding contact with the bed. "Why isn't there a single vegetable dish in the hotel's meal tonight?" Jin Wan asked as she ate. "We've stayed in the room for an entire day and even had a stomach full of meat at night. Why don't we find a place to pick some vegetables and fruits to cook for ourselves tomorrow? Is there any specialized organic vegetable garden in Haicheng?" Mo Jingshin glanced at her as though he could instantly see through her thoughts. After 2 seconds he said, "There is. I'll bring you there tomorrow." Jinwan placed another piece of pork ribs into her mouth, her heart filled with joy. She finally found a perfect excuse to avoid the bed. The next day, Jinwan had just pushed open Mo Jingshan's car door and stepped out when she saw a cluster of villas located in the wealthy area of Haicheng. Although it was a cluster of villas, it was a priceless area in Haicheng. There were not many people living here because not everyone could live here. How could there be a vegetable garden in a place like this? Did you bring me here to pick the grass? Jinwan suspected that she had been tricked by him and turned back to ask. Mo Jingshan parked the car and walked over. Go to Qin Siding's place. You can pick whatever you want. Ah? This is where Dr. Qin lives? Jinwan was astonished. He lives here alone. The backyard of the villa is spacious. In recent years, the Qin family's elder likes to grow his own vegetables and fruits. There isn't enough space at home, so he took over Qin Siding's backyard. Jinwan's gaze shifted toward the villa. So, behind such a beautiful high-class villa in Dr. Qin's home, there's actually a vegetable garden? This strange scene. As they spoke, a low-profile gray sports car drove in from the empty road. Originally it was about to drive past them when it suddenly braked. The car window rolled down, revealing Qin Siding's slightly surprised handsome face. What's the situation? Why have you come to my place? Jinwan felt as though she was about to steal vegetables but was discovered by the owner. She raised her hand and awkwardly waved at him. Hi, Dr. Qin. Qin Siding's gaze shifted down, noticing the basket in Jinwan's hands. He did not know where she had gotten it from. Chapter 113. The security of this villa area was very strict. Thankfully, Qin Siding returned in time, saving Jinwan a lot of unnecessary trouble. She followed him in. After receiving permission, Jinwan carried the basket all the way to the back of the villa. Qin Siding glanced at the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. He watched the woman in the backyard with a lukewarm smile on his lips as he leaned against the wine cabinet by the side. He took out a bottle of aged red wine and poured it into a goblet. He handed a glass to Mo Jingshan, swirling the wine in the glass as he casually said, "You really have endless ways of coaxing a woman. You even selflessly contribute to me." Mo Jingshan's lips curved imperceptibly. He took a sip of the wine and placed the glass down. "When did your taste become so bad?" he mildly mocked. Qin Siding coldly snorted. "I have at least 5 to 6 operations in the hospital every day. I'm so busy that I don't even have time to go home. The wine cabinet is filled with gifts from others. There are both good and bad ones. It's already not bad to have a few drinkable bottles. You're still picky?" Mo Jingshan coldly said, "I'll ask Shenmu to send 2 bottles over another day." Qin Siding raised his brows, placing down the wine glass. He could not hold back his laughter as he said, "It turns out this transaction is still worth it. Your wine is all 80 years old, high-quality wine. A basket of vegetables and fruits can be exchanged for 2 bottles of good wine. In the future, can I quit my job and focus on nurturing this vegetable field? It's even more profitable than being a doctor." Although Mo Jingshan was slightly disgusted, he still picked up the glass of wine and took a sip. A moment later, he indifferently said, "Ever since that woman kicked you away and went overseas, your quality of life and taste have been plummeting. I really can't stand it anymore." Qin Siding poured another glass of wine, but his smile did not reach his eyes. He turned to glance at Jinwan, who was picking vegetables excitedly behind him. He narrowed his eyes to say, "Brothers are like limbs, women are like clothes. This old man has gotten used to being naked these years." Mo Jingshan's cold brows moved. He mockingly glanced at him. "Who was the one who almost broke his own limbs for a woman? You speak as though you've seen through the mortal world. Do you really think you're a vegetarian monk?" Qin Siding frowned without batting an eyelid. He did not speak at first, but a moment later he poured a glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. Putting down the wine glass heavily, Qin Siding sneered coldly. "So what if you have a woman?" Impressive." Qin Siding choked and stared at him with a smile. He then raised his hand and pressed between his brows. "I'm going to the back to see your woman." "Don't King disgust me here." Jinwan was currently picking vegetables from the vegetable field in the backyard. She did not expect Dr. Qin's backyard to be so large. There were all kinds of vegetables and fruits. Although it was autumn, more than half of the backyard was covered with a greenhouse that could gather sunlight and heat. It could be seen that the Qin family's elder was indeed fond of these things. He even arranged such professional autumn and winter planting facilities so appropriately. Although the style of this vegetable garden and orchard was really out of place in this high-class villa area, standing in this lush green field was really relaxing and refreshing. Most importantly, Dr. Chin's home was very clean. The fruits and vegetables in the backyard were also grown especially well. There was no need to worry about pesticides or other chemicals like the orchards outside. Jean Wan plucked a bright red tomato and casually plucked the cabbage by the side. It was fresh and juicy. Even though it had not been washed or cooked, it was already stimulating one's appetite. Abruptly, she heard footsteps from nearby. She turned to see Qin Siding leisurely approaching. He glanced at the things in her basket, and a trace of a smile flashed past his eyes. Mrs. Mo is so carefree. I almost thought you came here for a vacation. Qin Siding walked over, casually picking up a cabbage from the basket. And speaking of which, it seems like our Qin family can also expand into the agricultural vegetable industry in the future. For these kinds of vegetables, 100 yuan per piece is not too much. Thankfully, you're not interested in the Qin family's company. Otherwise, with your scamming behavior, the Qin family would be ruined in a few years. Jean Wan half-jokingly plucked another tomato. She casually wiped it in her hands and took a bite. Qin Siding glanced at her. You're eating it without washing it? There are no pesticides on it. It's not like there's anything wrong with eating it. Jean Wan's mood was especially good due to the sweet and sour taste in her mouth. She completely ignored Qin Siding's disgusted expression and used her other hand to pluck another tomato for him. Seeing that he did not take it, she raised her eyebrows and tossed it into the basket. I know you doctors are all misophobic, but don't be so spoiled, all right? You don't even want to eat something so natural. Don't tell me you only drink disinfectant every day? Qin Siding stood casually with his arms crossed. He casually and indifferently glanced at her. The spoiled G family's young miss actually dares to say someone else is spoiled? Ah, are you slapping your own past face? Have you forgotten what kind of temper you had in the past? People change, Yi Zichen said. Jean Wan did not look at him. She lowered her head to inspect the vegetables in the basket. Her tone was warm and calm. Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, I'm still me. It's normal for my personality and habits to change a little. Qin Siding suddenly laughed mockingly, coldly and indifferently saying, Indeed, women are all fickle. Jean Wan's hand that was fiddling with the vegetables in the basket suddenly paused. She vaguely heard some deeper meaning in his tone and instinctively felt that Qin Siding had a story. She raised her head and glanced at him. Qin Siding did not look at her again. When he turned around, he coldly threw down a sentence. Be careful. Don't step on the radishes and potatoes on the ground. If you damage them, my family's elder will directly look for your family's Mo Jingshan to settle the score. Jean Wan paused. She lowered her head to look at the things planted in the soil by her feet. Earlier on, she did not pay attention to this side. Thankfully, she did not step on them. The fruits are all at the back. If it's too high, take a ladder and pick them yourself. Last night, you could even jump out of the window. Climbing a tree shouldn't be difficult for you. While speaking, Qin Siding glanced at her with a hint of a smile. When Jean Wan directly rolled her eyes at him, he used his chin to point not far away. The ladder is over there. It's very safe. You won't fall. Thanks. Jean Wan took another bite of the tomato in her hand and turned to head to the orchard behind. It was as though they had a great harvest. Jean Wan happily held the basket full of vegetables as she walked back from the back. Dr. Qin, is the kitchen in your house usable? Jean Wan asked excitedly. Qin Siding narrowed his eyes. So you're not only here to pick vegetables, but you're really treating my place as a holiday villa. You even want to start a fire and cook? Not only do we want to start a fire, we're also planning to stay here tonight. Do you have any objections? Qin Siding leaned against the door. It's been 2 months and I finally have a rare day off. Just for this one day, I have to watch the two of you show off your affection in front of me. It hurts my eyes. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.